Conan, The Shadow of Kull, a novel of Conan, the Cimmerian on the YouTube channel, Musings of a Cigarette-Smoking Man, Part 1. The Raid. Chapter 1. The Gang. The horse beneath him was dying. Conan could feel it in the animal's gait, the stumble that came more frequently now, the labored breathing, the way its head hung lower with each mile. The beast had been ridden hard for 3 days, and it had nothing left to give. By nightfall it would collapse. By morning the vultures would find it. He did not feel sorry for the horse. He did not feel much of anything these days. The column of riders stretched ahead of him, 15 men on horses, in various states of exhaustion, making their way through the scrubland that marked the border between civilization and the empty places of the world. They moved in loose formation, spread out to minimize dust clouds that might be seen from a distance, their weapons ready but not drawn. Professional, cautious, men who had done this many times before. Conan rode at the back, where the newest members always rode. He had been with the gang for 4 months, now long enough to learn the rhythms, not long enough to be trusted with anything important. He was 19 years old, tall and broad-shouldered, with black hair that fell past his shoulders and blue eyes that held a coldness beyond his years. The other raiders called him the Cimmerian, when they called him anything at all, which was not often. He preferred it that way. The leader of the column raised his fist, signaling a halt. The riders pulled up, their horses grateful for the rest, and Varn walked his mount back along the line to where Conan waited. Varn was a hard man in his middle years, his face a map of scars and weathered skin, his body lean and ropey, with the kind of muscle that came from decades of violence. He had been a soldier once, in one of the endless border wars that plagued the barbarian kingdoms. And when the war ended and his services were no longer required, he had taken his skills to the only market that would have them. He was not cruel, exactly. He was simply practical, in a way that left no room for sentiment or mercy. The village is over that ridge, Varn said, pointing toward a line of hills that rose against the afternoon sky. We hit them at dawn. Standard approach fast in, secure the valuables fast out, though unnecessary killing. And if they resist, then it becomes necessary. Varn's eyes were flat, empty of anything that might be called feeling. But they won't. They never do, these farming villages. They see the horses, the weapons, the numbers. They do the math, and decide their lives are worth more than their grain. Conan nodded. He had seen it happen a dozen times since joining the gang. The farmers would protest, plead, sometimes weep, but in the end, they would hand over what was demanded, and the raiders would take it and leave, and life would go on, and no one would die unless they did something stupid. It was robbery. It was wrong, but it was also survivable for everyone involved. Get some rest, Varn said. We ride before dawn. He turned his horse and moved back up the column, leaving Conan alone with his dying mount and his thoughts. They made camp in a dry wash, out of sight from any road or trail. No fires. Varn was strict about that. Even when they were miles from anywhere, the men ate cold rations and slept in shifts, their weapons close at hand, their horses hobbled but not unsaddled. Conan found a spot at the edge of the camp, his back against a boulder, his sword across his knees. He did not expect to sleep. He rarely slept well anymore. His nights plagued by dreams he could not remember, but that left him exhausted and uneasy. But he closed his eyes anyway, letting his body rest, even as his mind churned. He had been alone in the world since he was 14. That was when the Cimmerian clan he had been traveling with was ambushed by Vanir raiders, scattered into the wilderness, most of them killed. Conan had survived. He always survived. It seemed to be the one thing he was good at, and had wandered south, into the lands of the Hyborians, looking for something he could not name. He had been a thief for a while, in the cities of Zamor, a gladiator briefly in the fighting pits of Shadizar, a mercenary for a season, in a border skirmish that neither side seemed to care about winning. And now this riding with Varn's gang, robbing farmers and merchants, taking what he needed to survive and moving on before anyone could catch up with him. It was not a life. It was an existence. a series of days that followed each other without meaning or purpose, leading nowhere, signifying nothing. Sometimes, in the quiet moments between violence, he wondered if this was all there was, if the world was simply a machine for generating suffering, and he was just another cog in its workings, grinding along until something ground him down in turn. Those thoughts never led anywhere useful. He pushed them away when they came, focused on the next task, the next meal, the next sunrise. Thinking about meaning was a luxury for men who had homes and families and reasons to care about tomorrow. Conan had none of those things. He had only the sword on his knees, and the strength in his arms, and the cold certainty that the world would kill him eventually. And until then, he would keep moving. It was not much of a philosophy, but it was all he had. A hand on his shoulder woke him. Herc, one of the older raiders, was crouched beside him, his face barely visible in the pre-dawn darkness. "Time to ride," Herc said, Barnes giving the signal. Conan rose, his body stiff from sleeping on cold ground, his mind still foggy with the remnants of dreams. He gathered his weapons, sword, knife, the short bow he had taken from a dead man in Zamora, and went to find his horse. The animal was still alive, which surprised him. It looked at him with eyes that held no reproach, no understanding of what was about to happen. Just a horse, doing what horses did, waiting for commands from creatures he could not comprehend. He mounted and joined the column as it began to move, falling into his place at the rear, watching the other riders as they climbed the ridge that separated them from the village below. The sky was lightening in the east, the first hints of color bleeding into the darkness. Soon the sun would rise, and the day would begin, and men would do what men always did, take from the weak, protect what was theirs, struggle and suffer, and eventually die. Another day, another robbery, another step in the long march toward nothing. Conan rode on and tried not to think about what waited on the other side of the ridge. Chapter 2. The Village. The village was called Corval, though Conan would not learn that until later. It sat in a shallow valley between two ridges, a collection of perhaps 30 buildings clustered around a central well. Farmland spread out from the village in all directions, fields of grain, mostly, with orchards on the higher ground and pastures for the few cattle and sheep that the villagers kept. It was a peaceful place, the kind of place that existed on the edges of kingdoms, far from the wars and politics that consumed the great cities, concerned only with the eternal cycles of planting and harvest, birth and death, the simple rhythms of agricultural life, the kind of place that made easy pickings for men like Var. The rears came over the ridge at first light, spreading out into a line that would sweep down on the village from 3 directions simultaneously. There was no war cry, no dramatic charge, just a businesslike advance, horses at a canter, weapons drawn but not yet bloody. The villagers saw them coming. Conan could see the panic spreading through the settlement, people running from building to building, shouting warnings, gathering children and valuables. A few men emerged with farming tools held like weapons, but their faces showed that they knew the futility of resistance. Varn raised his hand, and the line halted at the edge of the village. He rode forward alone, stopping his horse before the largest building, a combination of meeting hall and granary, by the look of it, and waited. An old man emerged, gray-bearded, stooped with age, but carrying himself with the dignity of one who had led his people for many years. The village headman, Ponydust, the one who would negotiate. "We don't want trouble," the old man said, his voice steady despite the fear that must have been churning in his gut. "Take what you need and go. We won't resist." "Sensible," Varan said. "Grain, preserved meat, any gold or silver you've managed to accumulate. Load it into your carts and bring it here. You have 1 hour. An hour isn't enough time to. Then you'd better move quickly." The old man hesitated, then nodded and turned back toward the village. Behind him, the people of Corval began the grim work of surrendering their winter stores, their savings, the fruits of a year's labor. Conan watched from the edge of the line, his hand resting on his sword hilt. This was the part he hated most, not the violence itself, but the waiting, the knowledge that at any moment something could go wrong. A farmer with more courage than sense, a raider with an itchy sword hand, a child running into the wrong place at the wrong time. So many ways for a robbery to become a massacre, and nothing to do but wait and see which way the dice would fall. The carts were half loaded when Barnes' mood changed. Conan saw it happen, a subtle shift in the way the gang leader held himself, a tightness in his shoulders that hadn't been there before. Barnes was watching the village with an intensity that went beyond simple caution, his eyes moving from building to building, his hand never leaving his sword. "Something's wrong," said Dragon, one of the riders nearest to Conan. He was a Zingbaran, swarthy and quick-fingered, with a reputation for cruelty that even the other raiders found excessive. Barnes got that look. What look? The one that means someone's going to bleed. Conan said nothing, but he loosened his sword in its scabbard. Dragon was right, there was something in the air, a tension that hadn't been there before. The villagers felt it too. Their movements had become more hurried, more frightened, casting glances toward the raiders with the look of prey animals sensing a predator's shift in attention. Varn rode slowly toward the granary, where two young men were loading sacks onto a cart. He stopped beside them, looking down from his horse with an expression that Conan had never seen before. "You," Varn said, pointing at one of the young men. "Come here." The young man looked up. Confusion and fear were warring on his face. He stepped forward hesitantly, hands spread to show they were empty. "You think I don't recognize you?" Varn's voice was soft, almost gentle. "You think I'd forget the face of the man who killed my brother?" The young man's face went white. I don't know what you're talking about. I've never. 3 years ago, the raid on Tessin, my brother took an arrow through the throat." Varn leaned forward in his saddle. The archer was young, barely a man, black hair, green eyes, a scar on his chin. He pointed at the young man's face, where a thin, white line ran from lip to jaw. "That scar. It wasn't I was defending my... I know exactly what you were doing." Barnes smiled, and there was nothing human in it. "I've been looking for you for 3 years. Didn't expect to find you in this pisshole of a village. But here you are, like Mitrid himself delivered you to me." The young man tried to run. He made it 3 steps before Barnes' sword opened his spine. What happened next would stay with Conan for the rest of his life. Barnes turned to face the raiders, his sword dripping, his eyes blazing with a fire that seemed to have been lit by the killing and now demanded more fuel. "Forget the hour," he said. "Forget the negotiations. I've changed my mind about how this is going to go." He pointed his sword at the village. "Show them what happens to people who kill my blood. Show them what happens to anyone who resists. I want this place burned. I want them to remember. I want everyone who hears about Corval to know what we're capable of." The riders shifted. Some of them looked uncertain this wasn't what they had signed up for. This wasn't the clean robbery they had expected. But others were already moving forward, drawing weapons, their eyes bright with anticipation. Draken was the first to reach the village. Conan heard the first scream before the Zingmer had even dismounted, and then the screaming didn't stop. Conan rode into the village, because that was what you did when the gang moved. He didn't know what else to do to refuse. To turn back would have been to make himself a target, and so he followed, and he watched, and he tried to understand what was happening around him. It was not robbery anymore. It was not even war, which at least had rules and purposes and ends. It was something else, something that had no name in any language Conan knew. Something that seemed to emerge from some dark place in the human soul where reason and mercy could not reach. The raiders moved through the village like a plague, killing whoever they found, taking whatever they wanted, destroying what they couldn't take. Men who surrendered were cut down anyway. Women were dragged into buildings, their screams audible even over the general chaos. Children ran in all directions, pursued by men who seemed to have forgotten they were human. Conan saw a raider he had shared meals with drive his sword through an old woman's chest because she was too slow to get out of his way. He saw another one laughing as he set fire to a house with people still inside it. He saw things that would not leave him, that would wait in the dark corners of his mind and emerge in dreams for years to come. And through it all he wrote, He did not participate. He did not stop anyone. He simply moved through the chaos like a ghost, unable to act, unable to look away, unable to understand how the world had become this, until he found the boy. Chapter 3. The Breaking. The grain pit was at the edge of the village, a simple hole in the ground covered by a wooden lid, used for storing seed corn through the winter. Conan had ridden past it twice before he noticed that the lid was slightly askew, as if someone had moved it recently. He dismounted and pulled the lid aside. The boy was huddled at the bottom of the pit, perhaps 7 years old, his knees drawn up to his chest, his eyes wide with terror. He had a wooden toy in his hands, a horse, crudely carved, clutched like a talisman against the horrors above. For a long moment, Conan simply looked at him. The boy looked back, too frightened to speak, too paralyzed to run, and something cracked inside Conan, something that had been holding him together since the raid began, since he had watched the first killing and done nothing, since he had ridden through the massacre like a man moving through a nightmare. He knew this boy, not personally, they had never met, would never meet again, but he knew him in a deeper sense, the sense that transcended individual lives and connected all suffering across all time. He knew him because he had been him once, huddled in a hiding place, listening to the screams, praying to gods he didn't believe in for salvation that would never come. The raid on his own village, the one that had killed his father, taken his mother, shattered everything he had known. He had been younger than this boy, 5, maybe 6, but the memory was burned into him like a brand. And now here he was on the other side, not the victim, but the victimizer, one of the men who brought the screams and the fire and the endless, senseless destruction. "Hey, Cimmerian!" The voice came from behind him. Dragon blood on his hands and face, riding toward the grain pit with a smile that made Conan's stomach turn. "Found yourself a little rat, did you? Let me see." "No." The word came out before Conan knew he was going to speak it. His hand was on his sword, and he was turning to face Dragon. And somewhere in the back of his mind, a voice was screaming that this was suicide, that he was alone against a gang of killers, that he had no chance. Dragon stopped, his smile fading. "What did you say?" "I said no." Conan's voice was flat, dead, the voice of a man who had stopped caring about consequences. "Right away. Find someone else to play with." "You're going to tell me what to do? You, who's been with us for 4 months." Dragon laughed, but there was uncertainty in it. The look in Conan's eyes was not the look of a man who could be intimidated. "Barn will hear about this. You know what he does to men who don't follow orders. Then tell him. But you're not touching this boy." For a long moment, they faced each other, Dragon on his horse, Conan on foot, the grain pit between them. The sounds of the massacre continued in the background, screams and flames, and the crash of falling buildings. Then Dragon shrugged. "Fine, keep your little rat, but don't expect me to cover for you when Barn finds out." He rode away, back toward the center of the village, where the killing was still in progress. Conan turned back to the grain pit. The boy was still there, still clutching his wooden horse, still staring up with those terrified eyes. "See here," Conan said. "Stay hidden. Don't come out until everything is quiet. Do you understand?" The boy nodded. Just barely. Conan replaced the lid over the pit, positioning it exactly as it had been, hiding the boy from sight. Then he mounted his horse and rode out of the village, away from the screams, away from the flames, away from everything he had been and everything he had failed to stop. He did not look back. Chapter 4. Flight. He rode north because north was away from everything else. The gang would come after him eventually. Barn did not tolerate deserters, and Dragon would make sure the gang leader knew what had happened. They would track him, hunt him down, and make an example of him. It was only a matter of time. But time was all Conan needed. Time and distance. Space between himself and the thing that he had witnessed, the thing that he had been part of. Every mile that passed beneath his horse's hooves was a mile farther from Corval, from the screaming, from the look in that boy's eyes. He rode until his horse stumbled and nearly fell, then dismounted and walked. leading the animal by the reins. The land around him was changing scrubland, giving way to rockier terrain, the hills growing taller and more barren. He was entering the wastes, the empty places between kingdoms, where no one lived and nothing grew. A good place to disappear. A good place to die, if it came to that. He walked through the day and into the night, stopping only when his body refused to continue. He had no food. His saddlebags had been left behind in the camp, along with everything else he owned. He had a water skin half full, and the weapons he carried. Nothing else. The horse died on the second day. It simply stopped, its legs buckling, its great head dropping to the ground. Conan stood beside it for a moment, then drew his knife and cut its throat to end its suffering. He considered butchering it for meat, but the thought of eating made his stomach turn. He left the carcass for the vultures and walked on. By the third day, he was no longer sure if the gang was following him. He had seen no signs of pursuit, no dust clouds on the horizon, no hoofbeats in the distance. Perhaps they had decided he wasn't worth the effort. Perhaps they were busy with other things, other raids, other massacres. Or perhaps they were out there somewhere, waiting, patient as hunting cats. He didn't care anymore. The heat and the thirst and the endless walking had burned away everything that might have been called caring. There was only the next step, and the step after that, and the sun beating down on him like a hammer on an anvil. He was going to die out here. He understood that now. The wasteland was too big, his resources too small. Eventually, his body would give out, and he would fall, and that would be the end of the story of Conan of Cimmeria. It seemed fitting somehow. A pointless death, in a pointless place, ending a pointless life. At least the vultures would eat well. On the fourth day, he found the ruins. They rose out of the wasteland, like broken teeth, massive stones, weathered by ages of wind and sand, arranged in patterns that hurt to look at. The architecture was wrong somehow, built according to principles that no human hand had ever followed. The angles didn't meet where they should. The doorways led to places that couldn't exist. Conan didn't care. The ruins offered shade, and shade was all that mattered. He stumbled into the shadow of the largest structure, his legs barely holding him, his vision blurring at the edges. He had finished the last of his water that morning, and his tongue was swollen, his lips cracked, his throat raw with thirst. He collapsed against a stone that felt oddly warm, like it had absorbed heat from a sun that had set years ago. His eyes closed. His body began the slow process of shutting down, and then, in the darkness behind his eyelids, he saw them, growing in the shadow of the stones, where no sunlight ever reached. A cluster of fungi, purple, black, glistening with moisture, their caps spread like hands reaching toward him. He opened his eyes. The fungi were there, real and possible, but undeniable, growing in a place where nothing should grow, thriving in conditions that should have killed any living thing. Conan crawled toward them. Some distant part of his mind warned that they might be poison, that eating unknown plants was a good way to die screaming. But he was going to die anyway. What difference did it make how? He pulled the largest mushroom from the ground and bit into it. The taste was indescribable, sweet and bitter, earthy and electric, like nothing he had ever eaten. The moisture in the flesh was cool on his parched throat, the substance filling his empty stomach. He ate all of them, every last one, until his fingers were stained purple and his belly was full for the first time in days. Then he lay back against the warm stone and closed his eyes. Prom, he thought. If you're taking me to the grey halls, I'm ready. Just make it quick. The world began to shift around him. The stone beneath him seemed to breathe. The sky above him rippled like water disturbed by a thrown stone. And somewhere in the distance, or perhaps inside his own head, a voice began to speak. So, you are the one who carries my blood. The wasteland dissolved. The ruins dissolved. Everything dissolved. And Conan fell into the dream. End of Part 1. The Raid. Part 2. The Dissolution. Chapter 5. The Unmaking. The stones were breathing. Conan watched them expand and contract, their surfaces rippling like the flanks of sleeping beasts. The movement was slow, rhythmic, almost peaceful. In, out, and he found himself matching his own breath to theirs. as if the ruins had become his lungs, and he was merely along for the ride. This should have frightened him. Some distant part of his mind recognized that stones did not breathe, that what he was seeing was impossible, that something had gone terribly wrong, but the fear could not find purchase. It slid off him like water off oiled leather, leaving only a vague curiosity in its wake. Interesting, he thought. The stones are alive. He tried to stand and discovered that his legs had forgotten how to work. Not paralyzed, he could feel them, could sense the muscles and bones and tendons that made up their structure, but the connection between intention and action had been severed. He thought stand, and his legs did nothing. He thought move, and they remained exactly where they were. So he looked at them instead. His legs were wrong. The angles were off, the proportions distorted. His knees bent in directions that knees should not bend. His feet were too far away, separated from his body by miles of empty space that somehow fit within the confines of his own skin. He raised his hands to examine them, and found that they too had changed. The skin was translucent now, like parchment held up to candlelight, and through it he could see the workings beneath, blood moving through veins like rivers through canyons, muscles shifting like the coils of snakes, bones gleaming white and wet in the sourceless light that suffused everything. He touched his face. His fingers sank through skin as if it were water, past muscle and bone, until he was touching the inside of his own skull. The sensation was not painful. It was not anything, just pressure, and the wet warmth of his own interior, and the understanding that the boundaries of his body had become negotiable. I am coming apart, he thought. I am dissolving. He opened his mouth to scream, and birds flew out. They were black birds, glossy, feathered and sharp-beaked, and they poured from his throat in an endless stream. He could feel them forming in his chest, feel them climbing up through his esophagus, feel their wings brushing against the inside of his mouth as they emerged. There must have been hundreds of them, thousands, a flock so vast that they darkened the sky above the ruins, their cries drowning out everything else. When they were gone, when the last bird had taken flight and joined the wheeling mass above, Conan found that he could not close his mouth. His jaw hung open, dislocated or dissolved, and when he reached up to touch it, his hand passed through his face entirely. The sky was wrong now. It had too many suns, 3, 5, a dozen, each a different color, casting shadows that contradicted each other and overlapped in impossible ways. The ruins around him were melting, their stones flowing like wax, reforming into shapes that hurt to perceive. He was not in the wasteland anymore. He was not anywhere that had a name or a place on any map. He was somewhere else, somewhere between a space that existed only in the gaps between reality and whatever came after. And then the voice spoke again. So, you are the one who carries my blood. It came from everywhere at once, from the melting stones and the impossible sky and the birds still circling overhead. It came from inside his skull, resonating against the bone that his fingers had touched. It came from the past and the future and the places where time had no meaning. Conan tried to respond. He formed words with a tongue that might not exist anymore, pushed them out through a throat that had recently been full of birds. What emerged was not language. It was a sound like grinding stones, like mountains colliding, like the slow collapse of continents into the sea. You are not ready to speak, the voice said. There was amusement in it, but not kindly. The amusement of something ancient watching something young make its first fumbling attempts at existence. That is fine. You are not ready for anything, but you will be, or you will not. The sky cracked, not metaphorically, actually cracked, like ice on a frozen lake. Dark lines spreading across its surface. Through the cracks, Conan could see something else. Another sky, perhaps, or the absence of sky, or something that had no name, because nothing with a name had ever seen it before. Either way, the voice continued, this will be educational. The cracks widened, the sky fell in pieces, revealing the void beyond, and Conan fell with it. He fell for a long time. The sensation was not like falling from a height. There was no rush of wind, No sense of acceleration, no ground approaching to end the descent. It was more like sinking, slowly and inexorably, through layers of reality that peeled away one after another like the skins of an onion. He passed through worlds, glimpses, fragments, moments that flashed past too quickly to comprehend. A city of glass towers beneath a green sun, an ocean of fire, its waves frozen in mid-crush, a forest where the trees were made of bone and the leaves were made of screaming. Each one was there and gone in an instant, replaced by another, then another, then another. And all the while the voice spoke. "You think you know suffering," it said. "You think the things you have seen, the things you have done, have prepared you for what comes next. You are wrong." Conan tried to speak again. This time something almost like words emerged, broken, distorted, but recognizable. "Who are you?" "I am Kull, king of Atlantis, before the oceans drank it, king of Valusia after. I am your blood barbarian, your ancestor, the root from which your tree has grown. Kull is a legend, a story. All truths are stories. All stories contain truth. The question is not whether I am real, but what reality means in a place like this." Conan fell through a world made entirely of sound, music, and screaming, and whispers, all woven together into a fabric that wrapped around him and squeezed. He fell through a world where gravity changed direction every heartbeat, pulling him up, down, sideways in directions that had no names. He fell through a world of absolute darkness, and a world of absolute light, and a world where darkness and light were the same thing seen from different angles. And then, finally, he stopped falling. He was standing on a plane of black glass. The surface stretched to every horizon, perfectly flat, perfectly smooth, reflecting a sky the color of a bruise. There was no sun, but everything was visible in a sourceless gray light that seemed to emanate from the glass itself. Conan looked down at his body. It was his own again, solid, familiar, the scars and calluses he had earned over 19 years of hard living. His sword was at his hip, his knife in his boot. He was whole. For a moment he allowed himself to hope that the worst was over. Then he saw what was coming. At first it was just a darkness on the horizon, a smudge, a shadow, something that might have been a cloud or a trick of the light. But it was moving, and as it moved, it resolved into individual shapes. Wolves, not dozens, not hundreds, thousands of them, tens of thousands, an army of wolves with eyes like burning coals and teeth like polished knives. They came in a wave, a tide, an avalanche of fur and fang that covered the black glass from edge to edge. Conan reached for his sword and found that it was not there. He looked down. The scabbard was empty. The weapon vanished as if it had never existed. His knife was gone too. His hands were bare. He turned to run, and his legs would not move. Not paralyzed. He could feel them, could sense their readiness to obey. But they simply refused to carry him away from what was coming. "This is the first lesson," Kull's voice said, from everywhere and nowhere. "You have always relied on your body, your strength, your speed, your skill with weapons. Those things will not save you here." The wolves were closer now. Conan could see their eyes individually, could hear their breathing, could smell the carrion stench of their breath. They did not growl or snarl. They simply came, silent and implacable, a force of nature that could not be reasoned with or resisted. You must experience what it means to be helpless, to have no options, no escape, no possibility of victory. Only then will you understand what lies on the other side of fear. The first wolf reached him. Chapter 6. First death. It hit him like a battering ram, its weight driving him backward, its jaws closing around his forearm with a crunch of breaking bone. Conan had been bitten before by dogs, by wild animals, once by a man who had lost his weapon and his mind in the same moment. But this was different. The wolf's teeth did not simply puncture his flesh. They tore, ripping through muscle and tendon, grinding against bone with a sound like wet gravel. He screamed, not a battle cry, not a defiant roar, a scream of pure animal pain, ripped from his throat by the thing that was happening to his arm. And then the others arrived. They came from all directions at once, a tsunami of fur and fangs, their bodies slamming into him, their teeth finding flesh wherever they could reach. He felt his left leg taken out from under him, felt something clamp onto his shoulder, felt a dozen mouths closing on a dozen different parts of his body simultaneously. He went down on the black glass in the grey light, surrounded by an army of wolves. Conan fought, not with weapons, he had none. Not with technique, there was no technique for this. He fought with his hands, his teeth, his elbows and knees. He grabbed the wolf by the throat and squeezed until something crunched and the creature went limp. He drove his thumb into another's eye, felt the orb burst, heard the animal's howl of pain. He bit down on a third one's ear and tore it free, spitting blood and cartilage. He killed dozens of them, perhaps scores. The black glass around him was slick with blood, his and theirs, and the bodies of the fallen wolves formed a barrier that the living had to climb over to reach him. But there were always more. For every wolf he killed, 3 more took its place. For every attack he deflected, 5 more landed. His body was coming apart not from the mushroom this time, but from simple, brutal physics, teeth and claws, working in relentless coordination, reducing him from a man to a collection of wounds. He felt his belly open, felt the hot spill of his intestines onto the black glass, felt something a wolf, several wolves burying their muzzles in the cavity and feeding. The pain was beyond anything he had imagined. It was a universe of pain, a cosmos of suffering, an endless expansion of agony that seemed to have no limit. He could feel every tooth, every tear, every moment of his own destruction. His body refused to shut down, refused to grant him the mercy of unconsciousness or shock. He experienced all of it, every second, every sensation. A wolf tore out his throat, and he watched the arc of his own blood paint the grey sky. Another cracked open his skull, and he felt its tongue lapping at the meat of his brain. A third pulled his heart from his chest, and he watched it beat 3 times, 4, 5, before it finally went still. And still he did not die. Still his awareness persisted, trapped in the wreckage of what had been his body, forced to witness the feast that followed. The wolves ate everything. They cracked his bones for marrow, licked the blood from the glass, fought over the choicest pieces of meat. They reduced him to scraps, to fragments, to stains on the obsidian surface. And then, finally, there was nothing left. He woke up screaming. The sound echoed off walls that had not been there before, stone walls, old and crumbling, covered in moss that glowed with a faint phosphorescence. He was lying on a floor of packed earth, his body intact, his wounds healed, his heart beating steadily in a chest that had recently been torn open. He stopped screaming, pressed his hands to his face, felt the skin and bone and the stubble of several days' growth, touched his chest, his belly, his legs. Everything was there, everything was whole, but the memory of the wolves was not gone. It lived in his nerves, in his muscles, in some deep part of himself that would never forget what it felt like to be eaten alive. That was death by consumption, Kull's voice said. It came from the shadows, at the edge of the room, from the moss on the walls, from inside Conan's own skull. The oldest death, the one that waits in the dark places of every world, in the eyes of every predator, in the hunger that is the foundation of all life. Conan did not respond. He was still trembling, still processing, still trying to understand what had happened. You fought well, better than I expected, but fighting was not the point. The point was experiencing what cannot be fought, understanding, in your bones, what it means to face something that cannot be defeated. Why? The word came out as a croak, barely audible. Why this to me? Because you need to learn. Because the man you are now is not the man you need to become. Because there are things waiting for you in your future, in the waking world, that require a soul forged in fires you cannot yet imagine. Conan pushed himself to his feet. The room swayed around him, the glowing moss pulsing in rhythm with his heartbeat. And if I refuse, if I choose not to learn your lessons, then you will stay here, in this place between places, this dream within the dream. You will experience death after death, lesson after lesson, until your mind shatters and there is nothing left but a screaming thing that was once a man. The voice paused. That is also a choice. Some have made it. They are still here, somewhere, lost in the maze of their own destruction. How many deaths? As many as it takes, as many as you need. There are endless ways to die, Conan. We have only begun. The walls of the room began to dissolve, the moss fading, the stone crumbling into dust. Beyond them, Conan could see something else, blue-black depths, lightless and vast, stretching in every direction. Water, an ocean of it, with no surface in sight. Death by drowning, Kull said. Shall we continue? The floor vanished beneath Conan's feet. He fell into the sea. Chapter 7. The ocean without surface. The water was cold, not the cold of a mountain stream or a winter lake, a deeper cold, an older cold, the cold that existed at the bottom of the world where no light had ever reached. It seeped into Conan's skin, his muscles, his bones, wrapping around his heart like a fist and squeezing. He looked up. Darkness. He looked down. Darkness. He turned in every direction, searching for something, a surface, a bottom, a reference point of any kind, and found only the endless blue-black void. There was no up. There was no down. There was only the water, and the cold, and the pressure that was already building in his ears. He had been underwater before. Rivers in Cimmeria, lakes in Zamora, once a shipwreck off the coast of Shem that had nearly killed him. He knew how to hold his breath, how to move efficiently, how to conserve energy while searching for the surface. But there was no surface. He could feel it, or rather, feel the absence of it. The ocean went on forever, in every direction, an infinity of water with no air anywhere within reach. He held his breath anyway. What else could he do? The seconds stretched into minutes. His lungs began to burn, a familiar pain that grew less familiar as it intensified. His chest spasmed, his diaphragm trying to force him to inhale, his body demanding air that did not exist. He fought it, clamped his jaw shut, squeezed his throat closed, refused to give in to the animal instinct that screamed at him to breathe. He had survived worse. He had endured more. He could. His body betrayed him. It happened without warning. His mouth opened, his lungs expanded, and the ocean flooded in. Cold water rushed down his throat, into his lungs, filling the spaces where air should have been. He coughed, choked, tried to expel the water, and only succeeded in drawing more of it in. Drowning was not like the wolves. It was slower, quieter, more intimate. The panic came in waves, thrashing, fighting the desperate conviction that there must be a surface somewhere, that if he just swam hard enough, far enough, he would break through into air and light and life. But there was no surface. There was only the sinking, the heaviness that filled his lungs and dragged him down, the growing darkness at the edges of his vision. His thoughts began to fragment. Memory surfaced and dissolved his mother's face, the smell of wood smoke, the sound of his father's laughter, things he had not thought about in years, dragged up from the depths of his mind, as if the ocean were searching through him, examining the contents of his soul before it swallowed them. Let go, a part of him whispered. Stop fighting. It's easier if you let go. And he almost did. For a moment, an eternity, he considered it, simply opening his arms, relaxing his muscles, allowing the ocean to take him. The burning in his lungs would stop. The fear would fade. There would be nothing but cold and darkness, and the slow descent into whatever waited at the bottom. Surrender, Kull's voice said, and for once there was no mockery in it, not a death to the experience. You are drowning. You cannot change that, but you can choose how you drown, with fear or with acceptance, with struggle or with peace. Conan did not want peace. He wanted to live, wanted to fight, wanted to rage against the thing that was killing him. But he was so tired, and the water was so cold, and there was nothing to fight, nothing to resist, only the infinite weight of an ocean that did not care whether he struggled or surrendered. He stopped swimming. He let himself sink, and somewhere in the darkness, in the moment between breathing and not breathing, between living and dying, he found something unexpected. Stillness, not peace. He did not have the capacity for peace, not yet, but stillness, the absence of struggle, the understanding that some things could not be fought, could only be experienced. He drowned. And in drowning, he discovered that there was something on the other side of fear. He woke on a beach. Sand was not sand, it was bone. Thousands of bones, millions, ground down by time and tied into a white powder that shifted beneath him as he moved. Skulls grinned up at him from the surface, their empty eyes reflecting a sky that was the wrong color orange, maybe, or pink, or some shade that had no name. He coughed and water came up, not ocean water, something thicker, darker, that turned to ash as it left his mouth and drifted away on a wind that smelled like burning. Death by drowning, Kull said. The voice was closer now, almost conversational, surprisingly peaceful at the end. Did you notice the moment when you stopped fighting, when you accepted what was happening? There was something there, something that most men never find, because they die still struggling. Conan sat up, his body aching with the memory of cold and pressure. I felt it, the stillness. Yes, that is the first lesson, not the only lesson, but the first. Fear comes from resistance, from the belief that you can change what cannot be changed, that you can escape what cannot be escaped. When you stop resisting, fear has nothing to hold on to. But I still died. Of course you died. Death is not the enemy, Conan. Fear is the enemy. Death is simply a transition, a doorway. What lies on the other side depends on how you walk through it. Conan stood, his feet sinking into the bone sand. The beach stretched in both directions, curving around an island that he could not see the extent of. Behind him, the ocean that had killed him lay flat and still, its surface like black glass. How many more transitions? As many as it takes. You have experienced consumption. You have experienced drowning. There are other deaths, waiting, older deaths, stranger deaths, deaths that will teach you things you cannot yet imagine. A pause. But first, you must rest. Even in dreams, the spirit needs time to absorb what it has learned. The beach began to shimmer, its edges growing soft, its colors bleeding into each other. Sleep now, descendant of my blood. When you wake, the fire will be waiting. Conan did not want to sleep, did not want to surrender control, to close his eyes in a place where reality was negotiable and death was a lesson rather than an end. But his body had other ideas. The exhaustion hit him like a physical blow, driving him to his knees in the bone sand, his eyes closing despite his protests. The last thing he saw before the darkness took him was a city on the horizon, a city made entirely of flame. Chapter 8. The City of Fire. He woke standing up. That was wrong. He remembered falling, remembered the beach and the bones, sand and the exhaustion that had overwhelmed him. He should be lying down, should be disoriented, should need time to gather himself. Instead, he was standing at the edge of a city, and the city was burning. Not burning in the sense of a fire that had been set and would eventually die, burning in the sense of being made of fire. The buildings were flame, their walls and roofs and foundations all composed of dancing orange and red and yellow. The streets were rivers of molten light. The sky above was smoke and ember, a ceiling of ash that glowed with the reflected heat of a million fires. It was beautiful. That was the first thing Conan noticed, the terrible beauty of it, the way the flames moved in patterns that were almost like dance, almost like music translated into light. Then the heat hit him. It came all at once, a wall of burning air that seared his lungs and scorched his skin. He gasped, tried to retreat, and found that there was nowhere to go. Behind him was more fire, fire in every direction, fire that surrounded him like an ocean with no surface. The city of fire, Kull said, built by a civilization that worshipped the sun, in an age so old that even its ashes have turned to dust. They believed that flame was the purest form of existence, that to burn was to be transformed, to be cleansed, to become something greater than mere flesh. Conan tried to speak, but the air was too hot. His lips cracked, his tongue swelled. Every breath was agony. They were wrong, of course. Flame is not transcendence. It is simply fire. But there is a lesson here, nonetheless, a lesson about transformation, about the destruction that precedes all creation. You cannot become something new until you have been reduced to nothing. The fire reached him. It did not come quickly. That was the cruelest part, the slowness of it. A quick death by fire would have been almost merciful. A flash of heat, a moment of pain, and then nothing. But this fire was patient. It took its time. His hair went first. The smell of it burning, the acrid, chemical stench filled his nostrils, even as the flames worked their way across his scalp. His eyebrows followed, then his eyelashes, then the fine hairs on his arms and chest. Then his skin began to blister. He watched it happen, unable to look away, watched the bubbles form beneath the surface, watched them grow and swell and burst, watched the clear fluid inside turn to steam as it escaped. The pain was extraordinary, a living thing, with weight and texture and a voice that screamed in frequencies beyond human hearing. The blisters gave way to deeper damage. His skin split, peeled back, revealed the red meat beneath. Muscle fibers contracted in the heat, pulling his limbs into twisted positions, his fingers curling into claws, his jaw clenching until his teeth cracked from the pressure. He tried to scream. What emerged was a whistle of air through a throat that was already churning, a sound like steam escaping from a kettle. The fire worked inward, through muscle to bone, through bone to marrow. He felt his eyes boil in their sockets, felt them burst and drain down his cheeks in streams of vitreous humor that evaporated before they reached his jaw. He felt his lungs fill with heat, felt them cooking inside his chest like meat in an oven. He was a torch now, a candle, a thing that burned because burning was all that was left to it. And still he did not die. Still his consciousness persisted, trapped in the furnace of his own body, forced to experience every moment of his incineration. The pain reached a point beyond pain, beyond sensation entirely. There was only the fire, only the burning, only the slow reduction of everything he had been into ash and ember. "You are fighting it," Kull observed. "Even now, when there is nothing left to fight with, you resist. Why?" Conan could not answer. He had no mouth, no throat, no air. He had only the fire and the pain and the endless, impossible persistence of his own awareness. The wolves you fought because fighting is what you know. The water you fought until you learned to surrender. But this is different. This is not an enemy. This is a process. Transformation cannot be resisted, only experienced. Fire burned deeper, into the core of him, the place where identity lived. He felt pieces of himself catching flame and falling away. Memories, beliefs, the accumulated weight of 19 years of being Conan of Cimmeria. "Let go," Kull said, "not of life of attachment, of the conviction that you are this body, this collection of flesh and bone and memory. You are not. You are something else, something that fire cannot touch, because it was never made of anything that could burn." Conan did not understand, could not understand, in the midst of the conflagration that was consuming him. But something heard the words, something deep, something that existed beneath the screaming, beneath the pain, beneath all the layers of sensation and suffering, something that did not burn. He reached for it, not with hands. He had no hands. Not with will. His will had been reduced to cinders. He reached with something that had no name, something that had always been there, but had never been noticed, like a star hidden by the glare of the sun. And he found it, a stillness, a center, a place where the fire raged all around but could not enter. He rested there, in that impossible sanctuary, and watched himself burn. It took a long time. The fire was thorough. It consumed everything flesh and bone, blood and bile. The physical architecture of a body. It had served him for 19 years. It left nothing but ash, and then it consumed the ash, and then it consumed the memory of ash, until there was nothing left but the fire itself, burning without fuel, flames without a source. And then, finally, the fire went out. Conan woke in darkness, complete darkness, not the darkness of night, which always had stars or moonlight, or the faint glow of distant fires, but true darkness, the absence of all light, absolute and total. He was whole again. He could feel his body, hands and feet, chest and head, all the parts that had been reduced to cinders. He touched his face, felt skin and stubble, felt the ridge of his nose and the curve of his lips. "Death by fire," Kull said. His voice was softer now, almost gentle. the most transformative of deaths. Fire does not merely kill, it changes. What goes into the flame is not what comes out. I felt something, Conan said. His voice was rough, as if he had been screaming for hours. Perhaps he had. In the burning, a place where the fire couldn't reach. Yes, the core, the seed, the thing that you are beneath all the things you think you are. Most men never find it. They burn completely. And when they reform, they are the same as they were before, shaped by the same fears, driven by the same attachments, no wiser than they were before the flames. And if you find it, then you begin to understand that you are not your body, that you are not your thoughts, that the thing that watches, the thing that experiences, cannot be burned or drowned or devoured, because it is not made of anything that can be destroyed. The darkness around Conan began to lighten slowly, almost imperceptibly. Shapes emerged from the void, trees, perhaps, or pillars, or something that had no name in any human language. You have experienced 3 deaths now: consumption, drowning, burning. Each one has taught you something about helplessness, about surrender, about the indestructible core at the center of your being. How many more? That depends on you, on how quickly you learn, how deeply you absorb, how willing you are to let go of the things that are holding you back. A pause, but we are not finished with the deaths of the body. There are still things you must experience before we can move on to the deaths of the mind. The shapes around Conan solidified. They were trees, but wrong trees. Trees made of something that was not wood, their branches reaching toward a sky that was beginning to show colors that should not exist. Rest now, Kull said. Gather yourself. When you are ready, we will continue. And if I'm not ready, then we will wait. Time has no meaning here. We have as long as we need. The trees began to whisper. Their voices were not human, not even close to human, but there was something in them that Conan almost understood. An invitation, perhaps, or a warning. He sat down beneath the nearest tree, his back against its trunk, and closed his eyes. He did not sleep, but he rested, in the way that only a man who has died 3 times can rest, and he waited for whatever was coming next. End of Part 2. The Dissolution, Part 3. The Trials of Flesh, Chapter 9. Death by Earth. The trees watched him with eyes that weren't there. Conan could feel them, presences behind the bark, intelligences that observed without seeing, that understood without thinking. They had been watching since he sat down beneath them, and they would continue watching long after he was gone. They were old, these trees, older than the Fire City, older than the ocean without surface, older perhaps than anything else in this place between places. He did not know how long he rested. Time had no meaning here, Kull had said, and Conan was beginning to understand what that meant. Minutes stretched into hours or compressed into seconds. The light never changed. The shadows never moved. The whispers of the trees continued in their endless, incomprehensible rhythm. When he finally stood, his body felt strange, not wrong, exactly, but different, as if it had been taken apart and reassembled while he wasn't paying attention. Every joint moved smoothly, every muscle responded perfectly, but there was a lag, a disconnect between intention and action that hadn't been there before. You are becoming accustomed to death, Kull said. Your body remembers what happened to it, even when the wounds are healed. 3 times now it has been destroyed. 3 times it has been remade. He is beginning to understand that it is not as permanent as it once believed. Is that the lesson? That my body is temporary? That is part of it, but only part. You have learned what it means to be helpless, to surrender, to find the core that cannot be burned. Now you must learn something else. The trees began to thin around him, their trunks growing farther apart, their whispers fading into silence. Ahead, the ground sloped downward into a valley, but not a natural valley. This one was too regular, too precise, as if it had been carved by hands that understood geometry in ways no human architect ever could. Death by earth, the slowest death, the most patient. Conan walked into the valley. The ground swallowed him without warning. One moment he was walking on solid earth, the next He was falling through darkness, soil and stone closing around him like a fist. He tried to scream, but dirt filled his mouth before the sound could escape. He tried to thrash, but the earth held him immobile, pressing from every direction at once. He landed, if it could be called landing, in a space barely larger than his own body, compacted soil above him, below him, on every side. His arms were pinned to his chest, his legs pressed together, his head locked in place by the weight of the world. He could not move, could not breathe, could not do anything but exist in the crushing darkness. The suffocation began immediately. Unlike the ocean, there was no water here, just the absence of air. The growing pressure in his chest as his lungs demanded oxygen that did not exist. He had held his breath before in the drowning. He tried to hold it now, but the earth was patient. It did not rush. It simply pressed and waited and pressed some more. The weight increased. He could feel his ribs bending, threatening to crack. His skull felt like it was being squeezed in a vise, pressure building behind his eyes until he was certain they would burst. His spine compressed, vertebrae grinding against each other, the spaces between them shrinking millimeter by millimeter. He needed to breathe. His body demanded it, screamed for it, every cell crying out for air that was not there. He fought the urge, fought it with everything he had, clenching his jaw, squeezing his throat shut, refusing to give in. But the earth was patient, and Conan was not. He inhaled. Air filled his lungs. Not water, dirt, gray, dry, choking. It packed into his airways, blocked his trachea, turned his chest into a coffin of soil. He coughed, and more dirt entered. He convulsed, and the earth pressed tighter. He was being compacted, compressed, reduced from a man to a thing, from a thing to a shape, from a shape to a pressure that would eventually equal the pressure around it. The darkness was absolute. He could see nothing, hear nothing, feel nothing except the weight and the suffocation and the slow, inexorable crushing of everything he was. Time passed. How much, he could not say. The dying seemed to go on forever, not the sharp agony of the fire or the desperate panic of the drowning, but a slow, grinding diminishment. He felt himself getting smaller, denser, his body folding in on itself as the earth demanded more and more space. His bones broke, not all at once, but gradually, stress fractures spreading through his skeleton like cracks in ice. His organs ruptured, one by one, their contents mixing with the dirt that had invaded every cavity. His skull collapsed inward, and he felt his brain compress, his thoughts fragmenting as the physical substrate that held them was destroyed. The last thing he experienced, before the darkness became complete, was a strange sense of peace. Not the stillness he had found in the drowning, but something different, an acceptance of inevitability. The earth was patient, and patience always won. There was no fighting this death. There was only waiting for it to finish. He died pressed flat, reduced to a layer of organic matter indistinguishable from the soil around him. And somewhere in the darkness, in the space between death and whatever came next, Kull spoke. Death by earth, the patience of stone, the indifference of weight. What did you learn? He woke in a forest. Not the forest of strange trees where he had rested. This one was different, familiar and alien at the same time. Trees were recognizable. Oaks, perhaps, were something like oaks, their branches heavy with leaves that rustled in a wind he could not feel. But they were wrong in ways he could not immediately identify. Too tall, too straight, too perfectly arranged, and they were screaming. The sound was not audible, exactly existed below the threshold of hearing, a vibration that he felt in his bones rather than heard with his ears. But it was unmistakably screaming. The trees were in agony, had been in agony for a very long time, and their suffering had become the background noise of this place. Conan stood slowly, his body still remembering the weight of the earth. His ribs ached, his spine felt compressed. Every breath seemed like a gift, a luxury that could be taken away at any moment. You are beginning to carry the lessons, Kull observed, not just in your mind, but in your flesh. The body has its own memory, its own wisdom. It learns what the mind cannot teach. The screaming. What is it? The trees. They were human once, or something like human. They did something or failed to do something, and this was their punishment. Eternal awareness, eternal suffering, eternal existence without the release of death. Conan looked at the nearest tree, at the patterns in its bark that might have been faces, at the knots that might have been mouths frozen in permanent cries. That what waits for me, if I fail whatever test this is. No, your fate is your own to make, but the trees are a reminder of what permanence truly means. Death is not the enemy, Conan. Living without dying, that is the enemy. That is the hell that waits for those who cannot let go. The forest stretched in every direction, endless rows of screaming trees beneath a sky that pulsed with colors Conan had never seen. He did not want to walk through it, did not want to feel their suffering pressing against him at every step, but there was nowhere else to go. 4 deaths now pulse it. The body has learned much, but there are deaths that do not touch the flesh, deaths of the mind, the spirit, the self. Those are harder. Those are the ones that break most men. I didn't break. Not yet, but the trials of flesh were only the beginning. What comes next will test everything you are, not your strength, not your endurance, but the architecture of your identity. The question is not whether you can survive. The question is whether the thing that survives will still be you. Conan walked into the screaming forest, and the trees watched him pass with eyes that weren't there, mouths that couldn't speak, souls that had forgotten everything except the agony of existence without end. Chapter 10. The madness. He did not notice the moment when his mind began to fragment. Later, looking back, he would try to identify the exact point where reality became uncertain, where the solid ground of his thoughts turned to quicksand. But there was no single moment. It happened gradually, like water seeping through cracks in stone, like darkness creeping across the sky at dusk. It started with small things. He forgot his name for a moment, just a moment, barely noticeable. He reached for the word that had defined him for 19 years, and it wasn't there. Then it was, and he wondered if he had imagined the lapse. He looked at his hands, then didn't recognize them. The scars were wrong, positioned differently than he remembered, shaped in ways that didn't match his memories. He flexed his fingers, felt the familiar pull of tendons and joints, but the visual input refused to align with the physical sensation. His reflection in a pool of water showed someone else's face, not dramatically different, still recognizable as Conan, still bearing the features he had worn since birth, but subtly off. The angle of the jaw, the set of the eyes, the way the mouth curved when he tried to smile. "Who am I?" he asked, and the question was not philosophical. It was desperate, immediate, a plea for information that should have been automatic. No answer came. The forest changed around him, but he could not tell if the changes were real or imagined. The screaming trees gave way to something else, structures that might have been buildings, or might have been geological formations, or might have been thoughts made solid. They shifted when he wasn't looking, reformed when he turned away, refused to maintain consistent shapes. People appeared and disappeared. He saw his mother, did since he was a child, standing among the trees and beckoning to him. He saw Varn, the raider leader, laughing at some joke Conan couldn't hear. He saw versions of himself, younger, older, different, watching from shadows that shouldn't have existed. He tried to talk to them. His words came out wrong. Syllables rearranged themselves in his mouth, meaning dissolved before it could be communicated. Language itself became unreliable. I can't. This is what it feels like," Kull said, and his voice was the only stable thing in a universe of chaos. To lose yourself, to feel the architecture of your identity crumbling, brick by brick. You have always known who you are. What happens when that knowledge is taken away? Make it stop. I cannot. This must be experienced, as all the deaths must be experienced. But I can tell you this. The madness is not real. It is a test, a trial, a way of showing you how fragile the self truly is. What feels like destruction is actually revelation. Conan tried to hold on to the words, to use them as anchors against the storm in his head, but even as he listened, the words changed. The voice that spoke them became unfamiliar. The meaning slipped away like water through fingers. He was losing himself, piece by piece, thought by thought, the thing that had been Conan of Cimmeria was coming apart. Time stopped having sequence. He experienced moments out of order, a conversation he hadn't had yet, a meal he had eaten as a child, the sensation of dying by fire, interspersed with memories of swimming in a Cimmerian lake. Everything jumbled together, past and present and future colliding, reality fractured into shards that cut him every time he tried to make sense of them. He became convinced that he had always been here, in this place of shifting unreality, that his memories of Cimmeria, of the raiders, of the wasteland, and the mushrooms and the voice of Kull were all dreams he was waking from, that this chaos, this fragmentation, this endless dissolution was the true nature of existence. He became convinced of the opposite, that none of this was real, that he was still lying in the wasteland dying of thirst, that the entire trip was a final hallucination before the end. He became convinced that there was no he at all, that the thing observing these experiences was not a person, not an identity, but simply a pattern of sensations without a center to hold them together. He howled, not words, just sound, raw and primal, the voice of something that had lost the capacity for language and was reduced to pure expression. He tore at his hair, clawed at his skin, tried to feel something, anything that would anchor him to the reality that was slipping away. Yes, Kull said, and his voice cut through the chaos like a blade. Now you understand. The self is not solid. It is a story you tell yourself, a pattern that persists only as long as you continue to believe in it. Take away the story, and what remains? Conan couldn't answer. He had no answers. He had nothing, no name, no history, no identity, just the screaming emptiness where a person used to be. This is the death of the mind, not the ending, but the dissolution. The fire burned your body. This burns yourself. What survives? What is left when the story stops being told? The madness pressed in from all sides. Conan felt himself disappearing, his thoughts scattering like leaves in a windstorm, his memories fading into static. And then, in the very depths of the dissolution, he found something. Not the core he had discovered in the fire. This was different. This was older, simpler, more fundamental. A point of awareness that existed before thought, before memory, before the story of Conan or any other story. A witness, pure observation, without content or commentary. He couldn't hold onto it, he had nothing to hold with, but he could be it, momentarily, in the gaps between thoughts, and in being it, he understood something about the nature of sanity. The madness receded, not all at once, but gradually, like a tide going out. The fragments of his mind began to reassemble, memories clicking back into place, thoughts regaining their coherence. He was Conan, again Conan, of Cimmeria, 19 years old, trapped in a psychedelic nightmare that was teaching him things he had never wanted to learn. He lay on the ground, actual ground, solid and sable beneath him, and breathed, just breathed, felt the air entering his lungs, felt his heart beating, felt the simple, profound reality of being a coherent self. You found the witness, Kull said. There was something like approval in his voice, the part of you that observes without participating. Most men never find it. They identify completely with their thoughts, their memories, their stories, and when those things are taken away, they have nothing left. But you found what lies beneath. It was empty. The witness, just awareness, without anything to be aware of. Yes, that is its nature. The witness does not judge or interpret or prefer. It simply sees, and because it is empty, it cannot be destroyed. The madness could not touch it because there was nothing to touch. Conan pushed himself up, his limbs shaking with the aftermath of dissolution. The landscape around him had stabilized, the same screaming forest, but fixed now, consistent, real in a way it hadn't been before. 5 deaths, he said. How many more? 2 more deaths of the mind, then something else. But first you must understand what you have learned. I learned that I am not my thoughts. Yes, first you learn that you are not your body, that the core persists even when the flesh is destroyed. Now you have learned that you are not your mind, that the witness persists even when thoughts and memories dissolve. These are not separate lessons. They are the same lesson, seen from different angles. What is the lesson? That you are not what you think you are. That the thing you call Conan is a construction, a pattern, a story told by something deeper. And that deeper thing, the witness, the core, whatever name you want to give it, cannot be killed. It watches death happen. It does not experience death itself. The forest waited around him, patient and screaming. Conan could feel the next trail approaching, a weight in the air, a tension in the fabric of this place between places. Rest if you need to. The despair is waiting, and it is not kind to those who approach it exhausted. The despair, the sixth death, the death of meaning. You have lost your body, lost your mind. Now you will lose your reason for existing. Kull's voice faded, leaving Conan alone in the screaming forest with nothing but the memory of dissolution and the promise of something worse to come. Chapter 11. The Despair. He didn't know how long he walked before the forest ended. The screaming trees gave way to nothing, not darkness, not light, but an absence so complete that it seemed to negate the concept of space itself. One moment he was stepping between twisted trunks, and the next he was standing in a void that had no color, no texture, no dimension. Gray, that was the only word that came close. A gray so absolute that it seemed to absorb everything else: light, sound, thought, emotion. It stretched in every direction, featureless and infinite, a canvas on which nothing had ever been painted, and nothing ever would be. Conan turned in a circle, looking for something, anything to orient himself. There was nothing. No horizon, no landmarks, no variation in the endless gray. Just emptiness, extending forever. He walked. There was nothing else to do. Time passed differently here. In the other deaths, even the slowest ones, there had been a sense of progression, a beginning, a middle, an end. The wolves had eventually finished eating him. The ocean had eventually drowned him. The fire had eventually burned him to ash. But this had no end. He walked for what felt like hours, and the gray remained unchanged. He stopped, sat down, stood up again, and nothing was different. He screamed into the void, and the sound died without echo, absorbed into the nothingness, as if it had never existed. At first, he tried to maintain hope. There must be an edge, he told himself, a boundary, a place where this emptiness gives way to something else. He just had to keep walking, keep searching, keep believing that the gray would end. But it didn't end. Hours became days, became weeks, became eternities, and the gray stretched on, indifferent to his presence, unchanged by his passage. The hope began to die. This is what it is, Conan thought. This is all there is. Gray, forever, nothing before, nothing after, just this emptiness extending in all directions without limit. The thought was surprisingly calm, almost peaceful. He had been fighting for so long against the wolves, against the water, against the fire, against the dissolution of his mind. Here there was nothing to fight, nothing to resist, just the gray and the walking and the slow erosion of everything that had once seemed important. What did it matter? The question rose unbidden, and he could not find an answer. What did anything matter in the face of infinite emptiness? His struggles, his victories, his losses, all of them reduced to insignificance by the sheer scale of the void. He had been a raider. He had killed men, robbed villages, done terrible things to survive. And now he was here, in a gray eternity, where none of it made any difference. The people he had hurt were gone. The people he had helped were gone. The world itself was gone, replaced by this emptiness that cared nothing for good or evil, for strength or weakness, for life or death. He stopped walking. What was the point? The gray would not change. He would not escape. He would walk forever, or he would stand still forever, and either way, the outcome would be the same, an eternity of nothing, stretching endlessly in all directions. He sat down. The ground, if it was ground, felt neither hard nor soft. It simply was the same gray absence that surrounded him, the same infinite emptiness that had swallowed everything else. "This is the sixth death," Kull said, and his voice seemed distant, faded, as if it too was being absorbed by the gray. The death of meaning, not the ending of the body or the mind, but the ending of the reason to continue. Why move when all destinations are the same? Why fight when all outcomes are equal? Why live when life and death have become indistinguishable? Conan did not answer. He had no answer. The questions seemed to contain their own responses. There was no reason, no point, no purpose. Just the grey, and the waiting, and the slow acceptance of eternal meaninglessness. I faced this once, Kull continued, in the mirrors of Tuz and Thune, where I looked too deep and saw what lay behind all illusions. The sorcerer showed me that nothing was real, that the world was a dream, that all my struggles were meaningless, that the throne I had won, and the enemies I had conquered, and the life I had lived, were all shadows cast by shadows on the wall of a cave. What did you do? The question surprised Conan. He had not intended to speak, had not believed he still had the capacity for curiosity. But something in Kull's story had stirred the ashes of his interest. I chose to act anyway, not because it mattered it didn't, not because there was a point there wasn't, but because the alternative was to sit in the grave forever, waiting for something that would never come. But if nothing matters, then nothing matters, including the fact that nothing matters. Then meaninglessness is not a command to stop. It is a liberation from the need to find meaning. When you no longer require purpose, you are free to move. When you no longer demand significance, you can act without expectation. Conan considered this. The grey pressed in around him, infinite and indifferent, but somewhere in the void, not in the grey itself, but in the part of himself that watched the grey something stir, the witness, the core, the thing that observed without participating. It didn't care about meaning. It didn't need purpose. It simply was existing without justification, aware without intention. If that was all he had, if that was all anyone ever had, then perhaps the question of meaning was the wrong question to ask. Stand up, Kull said. Conan stood. Walk. Conan walked. He did not know where he was going. He did not know if there was anywhere to go, but he walked, one foot in front of the other, not because it mattered, but because standing still had become unnecessary. And somewhere in the grey, far ahead, or close behind, or in some direction that had no name, something began to change. The grey did not end gradually. It ended all at once. One step, he was in the void. The next, he was standing in a room. Stone walls, a single torch, chains hanging from the ceiling. A dungeon, or something that wanted him to believe it was a dungeon. And in the center of the room, hanging from those chains, was himself. Another Conan, identical in every way, except for the wounds that covered his body, and the terror in his eyes. The seventh death, Kull said. The rage. But first, you must understand what you are about to face. The other Conan looked up, and his eyes met Conan's, and in them was a reflection of everything he had tried to bury, the fear, the shame, the helplessness, the parts of himself he had never wanted to acknowledge. This is you, the you that you hide from, the you that you pretend doesn't exist. He has been waiting for you, and he is very, very angry. The chains fell away. The other Conan smiled, and the rage began. Chapter 12. The Rage. The other Conan moved first. He came across the dungeon like a storm, his hands reaching for Conan's throat, his face twisted into an expression of pure hatred. There was no technique in the attack, no skill, just raw, overwhelming fury, the kind that existed before thought, before strategy, before any of the refinements that civilization had layered over the primal core of human violence. Conan blocked the first strike, deflected the second, tried to create space between himself and his mirror image. But the other Conan was relentless, closing the distance as quickly as it opened, his hands finding purchase wherever they could throat, eyes, ears, the soft places where damage was easiest to inflict. They crashed into the wall, and the other Conan's fingers closed around Conan's windpipe. The pressure was immediate, absolute. Conan couldn't breathe, couldn't speak, couldn't do anything but claw at the hands that were crushing his larynx. He is everything you have ever feared about yourself, Kull said, and his voice seemed very far away. Every moment of cowardice, every failure of courage, every time you chose the easy path instead of the right one. He has been waiting in the darkness, growing stronger, feeding on your denial. Conan drove his knee into the other Conan's groin. The grip loosened, and he twisted free, gasping for air. But the other Conan was already coming again. The fight was unlike anything Conan had experienced. He had fought men before, hundreds of them, in battles and brawls and desperate struggles for survival. He had fought monsters, beasts, things that defied description, but he had never fought himself. The other Conan knew every move he knew, every feint, every counter, every combination of strikes that he had learned through years of violence. When Conan threw a punch, the other Conan saw it coming. When Conan tried to grapple, the other Conan had the same idea. They were perfectly matched, identically trained. Fight could have no winner, because neither of them could do anything the other couldn't anticipate. And yet the other Conan was winning, not through skill or strength, but through fury. The rage gave him something that Conan didn't have: a complete abandonment of self-preservation, a willingness to take any damage in order to inflict damage in return. Where Conan protected himself, the other Conan charged through. Where Conan hesitated, the other Conan struck. Blood ran from a dozen wounds. Some were Conan's, some were his mirrors, but more were Conan's, and the imbalance was growing. You cannot win, Kull observed. Not against this, not by fighting. Then, what am I supposed to do? You could lose. Accept defeat. Let the rage destroy you, as it has destroyed so many others. Conan blocked a strike that would have crushed his skull, but the impact drove him backward, off balance. The other Conan pressed the advantage, raining blows on his guard, wearing him down through sheer relentless pressure. Where you could ask a different question. Not how do I defeat my enemy, but why is my enemy fighting? The words penetrated the chaos of combat, lodging somewhere in Conan's mind. He had been treating this as a battle, an obstacle to overcome. But the other Conan was in his own rage, his own darkness, his own denied and buried self. Why was it fighting? What did it want? The answer came to him between one breath and the next. The rage wanted to be acknowledged. It had been locked away, suppressed, forced into the shadows where Conan didn't have to look at it. It had grown in that darkness, fed on its own resentment, become something monstrous because it had never been allowed to be something human. It wanted to exist. It wanted to be seen. It wanted to be part of him, not a prisoner in his depths. Conan dropped his guard. The other Conan's fist slammed into his face, and he went down. Blood filled his mouth. Sorrows exploded across his vision. He felt the other Conan mounting him, felt the hands closing around his throat again, felt the rage preparing to finish what it had started. I see you, Conan said. The pressure on his throat eased slightly. I know what you are. I know why you're angry. The other Conan's face twisted not with hatred now, but with something else. Confusion, perhaps, or a desperate, frustrated need. You're part of me. You've always been part of me. I locked you away because I was afraid of you, afraid of what you could do, afraid of what it would mean if I acknowledged you. The hands released his throat entirely. The other Conan sat back, his expression shifting through emotions, too fast to track. I was wrong, Conan continued. I am wrong. You don't belong in the dark. You belong. He reached up, touched the other Conan's face, felt tears there that his mirror didn't seem aware of. You belong with me. For a long moment, they stayed like that, Conan on his back, his mirror kneeling over him, the dungeon silent around them. Then the other Conan began to dissolve, not dramatically, not painfully, but gently, like mist burning off a morning sun. The rage didn't vanish. Conan could feel it flowing into him, integrating, becoming part of his wholeness instead of a prisoner in his depths. The dungeon dissolved with it. He was standing in the wasteland again, not the real wasteland. He could feel that this was still part of the trip, still part of the dream, but a representation of it. The same barren rocks, the same empty sky, the same ruins where he had eaten the mushrooms. And he was utterly, completely broken. The fight with the rage had taken everything he had, not just physical energy, but something deeper, some reserve of will that he hadn't known he was relying on. He had integrated his shadow, accepted his darkness. But the cost had been devastating. He couldn't stand, couldn't even crawl. He lay face down in the dirt, breathing dust, his body refusing to respond to his commands. You have reached the bottom, Kull said, and his voice was closer now, more present, than it had been since the beginning. This is where most men stay. This is where most men die, not in body, but in spirit. They become what you are now, mongrels, things that were once men. Conan wanted to argue, to fight, to prove that he was more than this, but he had nothing left. The deaths had taken his body, his mind, his meaning, his rage. What remained was barely human, just flesh and breath, and a flicker of awareness that refused to fade. The question is, will you stay here, or will you climb back up? He couldn't answer, had no answer. The effort of forming words, of organizing thoughts into language, was beyond him. I did not bring you here to destroy you, Kull continued, and there was something different in his voice, now gentler, almost kind. I brought you here to show you what you are capable of enduring. You have endured it. Now choose what to do with that knowledge. And something stirred in Conan, not strength. He had no strength. Not will his will was ashes. Something smaller, simpler, more fundamental. A spark, a flicker, the bare, irreducible minimum of life. It wasn't much, but it was there. Chapter 13. The Mongrel. Kull appeared, not as a voice, not as a presence, felt but unseen, but as a figure standing over Conan's broken body. He was massive, taller than Conan by a head, broader by half again, his muscles like iron cords beneath skin weathered by ages of existence. His face was Conan's face, the older, harder, refined by millennia into something more and less than human. He wore armor that had not existed for thousands of years, carried weapons forged before the first barbarian kingdoms rose from the ashes of Atlantis. His eyes were ancient, had seen the oceans drink his homeland, had watched civilizations rise and fall, had faced horrors that made everything Conan had experienced look like children's games. The king of Atlantis looked down at his descendant, and there was no pity in his eyes, only assessment, only the question that had been asked since the beginning. What will you do now? Conan tried to speak. What emerged was barely a sound, a rasp, a wheeze, the noise of a broken thing attempting to communicate. I can't. You can. The body is broken, but the body is not you. The mind is shattered, but the mind is not you. The will is exhausted, but the will is not you. What remains? What is the thing that speaks when everything else has fallen away? Conan didn't know. He had nothing left, no strength, no thoughts, no drive. He was empty, hollowed out, a shell that had once contained a person, but the shell was still speaking. Something was still trying. That, Kull said, that thing that tries when trying should be impossible. That is what you are, not the strength, not the coming, not the rage, but the spark that refuses to die. Kull crouched beside him, brought his ancient face close. The eyes that had seen everything looked into the eyes of a 19-year-old boy who had seen too much. I have watched my line for millennia, thousands of descendants, each carrying some fraction of my blood. Most of them lived and died without ever touching what you have touched. They passed from the world like shadows, never knowing what they might have been. His hand, massive, calloused, and possibly strong, reached out and touched Conan's face. But you have been destroyed, completely, utterly destroyed, and you are still here, still trying, still refusing to give up. I don't have anything left. Then find something. Create it. The man you were is dead. The mind you had is shattered. The will you relied on is ashes. Good. Now you can build something new, something that has nothing to do with what came before. Conan felt the touch on his face, felt the millennia of existence that Kull carried, felt the weight of all the lives that had flowed from that ancient source down through the ages to him. And somewhere in the emptiness, somewhere in the space where everything had been stripped away, he found a choice. Not a thought, not a feeling, not even a decision exactly. Just a choice. To move or not to move. To try or not to try. To continue or to stop. He chose to continue. The effort was immense. Lifting his head took everything he had. Getting his hands beneath him, pushing against the ground, required reserves he didn't know existed. Every inch of progress was paid for with pain, with exhaustion, with the screaming protest of a body that had already given more than it had. But he moved. Centimeter by centimeter, he lifted himself from the dirt. His arms shook, his vision blurred. Blood dripped from wounds that shouldn't exist in a body that had been remade so many times. Kull watched, did not help, did not hinder, simply watched with those ancient eyes that had seen everything and judged nothing. "Yes," he said, as Conan got his knees beneath him. "Like that. Not because you can, because you choose to." Conan's arms gave out. He collapsed, face burst back into the dirt, but he didn't stay down. It took hours, days maybe. Time had no meaning, and the effort consumed everything else. But eventually, impossibly, Conan stood. He swayed on legs that felt like water. His vision tunneled, brightened, tunneled again. Every heartbeat was a battle, every breath a victory. But he was standing. Kull stood before him, and for the first time they faced each other as equals, not in strength, not in experience, but in something deeper. Two men who had touched the bottom and climbed back up. "You have earned the right to the labyrinth," Kull said. "The trials of flesh are complete. The trials of mind are complete. What remains is the final test, the confrontation at the center of all things, where you will face the truth about reality itself." "What truth?" "That the waking world and this place are the same. That life is a dream, and dreams are life, and the only thing that separates them is the perspective of the dreamer." Conan swayed, caught himself, remained standing. "The labyrinth will show you what you need to see. At its center we will meet again, not as teacher and student, but as something else. And when that meeting is complete, you will either understand what I have been trying to teach you, or you will be lost in the maze forever. And if I understand, then you will return to the waking world, and you will be something you have never been before." "What?" Kull smiled a genuine smile. First Conan had seen from him. Free. The wasteland began to shift, the ruins dissolving, the sky folding in on itself, and in the distance, rising out of nothing, Conan saw the labyrinth, a structure that defied geometry, that existed in dimensions the eye couldn't process, that promised confusion and revelation in equal measure. The final test was waiting. End of Part 3. The Trials of Flesh. Part 4. The Impossible Lands. Chapter 14. Ascent or Mystics. The labyrinth did not begin immediately. Instead, Conan found himself walking through a landscape that refused to obey any rules he had ever known. The sky changed colors with each step, blue to green to a shade that had no name, then back to blue, then to something that might have been the idea of a color rather than the color itself. The ground beneath his feet alternated between grass and sand and stone and nothing at all, forcing him to trust that each step would find purchase. He walked because walking was what he had learned to do, not toward anything, not away from anything, just forward, into whatever waited. The town appeared between one blink and the next. It was not a human town. The buildings were too large, their doorways too wide, their architecture designed for bodies that moved differently than his. The streets were paved with something that looked like mother of pearl, swirling with iridescent patterns that shifted as he walked. And the inhabitants, they were centaurs, half horse, half human, moving through the streets with a grace that made Conan feel clumsy and earthbound. Their lower bodies were powerful, the muscled haunches of war horses, hooves that rang against the prose stone with each step. Their upper bodies were human, or nearly so, with faces that held an intelligence deeper than anything Conan had seen in the waking world. They noticed him. Of course they noticed him. He was the only two-legged creature in sight, stumbling through their town like a child lost in a forest. But they did not react with fear or hostility. They simply observed, accepted his presence, as they might accept a new tree growing in a familiar grove. One of them approached, an older centaur, his horse body gray with age, his human face lined with wrinkles that spoke of centuries rather than decades. He wore robes of woven starlight, or something that looked like woven starlight, and his eyes held the same ancient quality that Conan had seen in Kull. "You are the dreamer," the centaur said. His voice carried harmonics that no human throat could produce, resonances that seemed to vibrate in Conan's bones. "We have been waiting." "Waiting for what?" "For you to arrive, for the journey to bring you here." The scent or gesture toward a building that rose above the others, a temple, perhaps, or a palace, its spires reaching toward the impossible sky. Come, there is much to discuss, and time moves strangely in this place. Conan followed, because following was easier than questioning. The temple, if it was a temple, was filled with light, not lamplight or sunlight, but light that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves, from the air, from the very space between things. It illuminated without casting shadows, revealed without defining, showed everything and nothing at the same time. Other centaurs waited inside, dozens of them, arranged in circles around a central platform where cushions had been placed. Human-sized cushions, Conan noted. They had been expecting him specifically. He sat, because sitting was expected. The gray scent, or settled beside him, not sitting exactly, but folding his legs in a way that brought their faces to the same level. You have questions, the scent, or said. Ask them. Who are you? We are the keepers of the threshold. We exist in the space between the waking world and the world of dreams, between the labyrinth and what lies before it. Our purpose is to prepare those who would enter. Prepare them how? By helping them understand what they have learned. You have died 7 deaths, dreamer. You have been consumed and drowned and burned. You have lost your mind and your meaning and your rage. But do you understand what these experiences have taught you? Conan considered the question. He had been so focused on survival, on getting through each trial, on finding the strength to continue, that he had not taken time to integrate the lessons. I learned that I am not my body, he said slowly. That there is a core, a witness that persists even when the flesh is destroyed. Yes, what else? I learned that I am not my thoughts, that the self is a story and stories can be written. Yes, continue. I learned that meaning is not required, that action can exist without purpose, that movement can happen without destination. Yes, and I learned that my rage is part of me, that the shadow must be accepted, not fought. The gray scent, or nodded, his ancient eyes warm, with something that might have been approval. You have learned well, but there is one more lesson, the lesson that underlies all the others, that connects them into a single truth. What lesson? That reality is a dream, and dreams are reality. That the difference between waking and sleeping is a matter of perspective, not substance. Conan frowned. I've been told that, but I don't understand what it means. Of course you don't. Understanding is not possible from where you stand. You must enter the labyrinth, must face what waits at its center, must experience the truth rather than merely hearing it described. Ascend, or leaned closer, his voice dropping. But I will tell you this. The labyrinth is not a test you can pass or fail. It is a mirror. What you see there will depend on what you bring with you. What should I bring? Nothing. Everything. The question is meaningless. The scent, or smiled, and in that smile was something vast and strange and fundamentally alien. You will bring what you are. That is all anyone can bring. They talked for what felt like hours. The centaurs took turns speaking, each one adding a piece to a puzzle that Conan could not quite see. They spoke of the nature of time, which they said was not a river flowing in one direction, but an ocean with infinite dimensions. They spoke of consciousness, which they said was not produced by the brain, but filtered through it, like light through a prism. They spoke of death and life and the spaces between, where things existed that could not be described in any language. Conan listened, absorbed, let the words wash over him without trying to grasp them too tightly, and slowly something began to shift in his understanding. He had always thought of himself as a body moving through space, a mind processing experiences, a will making choices, solid things separate from the world around them. But the centaurs spoke as if these boundaries were illusions, as if the line between self and other, between inner and outer, between real and unreal, was a convenience rather than a truth. You are beginning to see the gray scent, or said, watching Conan's face. The edges are softening, the certainties are dissolving. That good? It is necessary. The labyrinth cannot be navigated by someone who believes in solid walls and fixed paths. You must learn to move through the impossible, to accept contradictions, to hold multiple truths, at once without demanding that they resolve into a single answer. How do I do that? By practicing. Right now, with us. Centaur gestured, and the temple began to change. The walls became transparent, then disappeared entirely. The floor remained, but beyond it was no longer the scent or town. It was something else, something that Conan could not immediately identify. A forest, but not the screaming forest from before. This one was made of... What am I looking at? What do you think you're looking at? Conan stared. The forest was made of frozen screams, but not the trees this time. The screams themselves, given form and substance, growing up from the ground like crystallized sound. They were beautiful and terrible, delicate and violent, impossible and undeniable. I don't know, he admitted. Good. I don't know is the beginning of wisdom. Hold that not knowing. Let it become comfortable. The labyrinth will require you to navigate without certainty, to choose without confidence, to act without understanding. The forest of frozen screams dissolved, replaced by something else, a city perhaps, or a machine, or a living thing the size of a mountain. It pulsed with rhythms that Conan could feel in his blood, and he realized that he was looking at a heart the size of the world, beating out a rhythm that sustained everything. The labyrinth will show you many things, the gray sent, or said. Some of them will make sense, most will not. Your task is not to understand, but to persist, to keep moving, keep observing, keep being present to whatever appears. Can you do that? I can try. Trying is all anyone can do. The centaur placed a hand on Conan's shoulder, a human gesture, strange from a creature so fundamentally different. You have been prepared well. The 7 deaths have stripped away what needed to be stripped away. You are ready for the labyrinth. When do I go? You are already there. You have been there since you ate the mushrooms in the wasteland. The labyrinth is not a place you enter, it is a perspective you adopt. Everything you have experienced has been part of it. Conan looked around. The temple was still there, or something like it, but it was also the labyrinth. And the labyrinth was also the wasteland. And the wasteland was also the waking world. And all of them were dreams within dreams within dreams. I don't understand, he said again. I know. That is exactly where you need to be. The gray centaur smiled, and then he was not a centaur at all. He was a tree. Conan stared at the tree. It was the same tree he had been talking to. He was certain of that. The same presence, the same ancient intelligence, the same warmth in its regard. But it was a tree, had always been a tree. The centaur form had been what? An interpretation? A translation? A way of making the tree's communication comprehensible to a human mind. He had spent hours, days, maybe having the most profound conversation of his life with a plant. The wisdom was real, Kull's voice said, warm with amusement. Does it matter what vessel it came from? Conan looked around. The temple was gone, had it ever been there. The centaur town was gone, if it had ever existed. He was standing in a forest of strange trees, their branches reaching toward a sky that pulsed with colors that shouldn't exist. I talked to a tree, he said. You talked to something. The tree was how your mind interpreted it, but the conversation was real. The wisdom was true. The preparation is complete. How can I trust anything I experience here? You cannot. That is the point. Trust is a function of certainty, and certainty is impossible in a place where reality changes based on how it is observed. You must learn to act without trust, to move without confidence, to choose without knowing if your choices are correct. Conan laughed, not bitterly, genuinely, with something like wonder. So the lesson from the centaurs was the same lesson you've been teaching all along. All the lessons are the same lesson, seen from different angles. The body is not you. The mind is not you. Reality is not what it appears to be. These are not separate truths. They are the same truth, expressed in different languages. And the labyrinth will show me this truth. The labyrinth will show you what you are ready to see. But first there is more preparation. The centaurs were just the beginning. The forest around Conan began to shift, the trees rearranging themselves, the paths between them leading somewhere new. Come, there is a palace nearby, where time runs backward. You have unfinished business with your past. Chapter 15. The palace of backward time. The palace was made of moments. not stone or wood or any material Conan could name, but moments themselves crystallized instants of time, stacked and arranged into walls and floors and ceilings. He could see through them, into them, catching glimpses of events that had happened long ago, or might happen in the future, or were happening right now in places he had never been. The doors opened backward, swinging shut to admit him, swinging open when he had passed through. The servants moved in reverse, walking away from their destinations, carrying empty trays toward kitchens where food was being unprepared. The chandeliers sucked light from the rooms, growing dimmer as the hours passed, and with each step Conan took forward, he felt himself moving backward in time. Not physically, he was still walking through the palace, still moving from room to room, but something else was traveling in the opposite direction. His age, perhaps, his experience, the accumulated weight of 19 years of existence. He was getting younger. The scars on his body faded, first the newest ones, then the older ones, until his skin was smooth and unmarked. His muscles shrank, not from weakness, but from the simple mathematics of time. A younger Conan had not yet built the strength that his older self possessed. His mind simplified, the complexity of adult thought giving way to something more direct, more immediate, more present. He was 18, 17, 15. The palace halls stretched around him, infinite and recursive, each room a moment in time that he had lived through or would live through or was living through right now. He saw himself, in some of them a younger Conan, moving through scenes he remembered or had forgotten or had never quite registered. And then he saw the village. It was not Corable, not the village where Vaughn's gang had committed its atrocity. This was older, smaller, rougher, a Cimmerian village nestled in a valley between grey hills. Smoke rising from cooking fires, children playing in muddy streets. His village, his home, the place where he had been born, where he had spent the first years of his life, where everything he would become had first taken root. The raiders came at dawn. Conan watched not as a man of 19, but as a child of 5 or 6, hiding in a grain pit, his small body curled around a terror so absolute that it had no name. He watched his father die on the threshold of their home, sword in hand, buying time for his family to escape. He watched his mother dragged away, her screams growing fainter as the distance increased. He watched the village burn. This was the memory he had buried deep as the foundation on which all his other walls had been built. The moment when he had learned that the world was not safe, that love could not protect, that the strong took what they wanted, and the weak could only hide and pray. This is where it started, Kull said, and his voice was soft, almost gentle. Not the raid you fled from, this one, the first one, the moment you decided that the world was a place of horror, and the only response was to become horrible yourself. Child Conan, hidden in the grain pit, watched his world end. An adult Conan, trapped in the body of his younger self, watched with him. He remembered this. He had always remembered this, but distantly, as if it had happened to someone else. The terror, the helplessness, the rage that had nowhere to go. He had packed it away, sealed it shut, built his entire personality around never having to feel it again. But he was feeling it now. The terror was absolute, not the terror of the deaths he had experienced. Those had been his own suffering, his own destruction. This was different. This was watching the people he loved being hurt, being taken, being destroyed, while he could do nothing but hide. He was 5 years old. His hands were small, his body weak, his mind too young to process what was happening. He understood only that the world had broken, that the safety he had taken for granted had been an illusion, that there was no one to save him because the people who might have saved him were dead or gone or fighting battles they couldn't win. He clutched his wooden horse, his favorite toy, the one his father had carved for him, and he prayed to Crom, though he didn't know what praying meant, though Crom was not a god who answered prayers. Nothing happened. The raiders did what raiders did. The village burned, and a small boy in a grain pit learned that the universe did not care about his suffering. You have carried this for 14 years, Kull said. It has shaped everything you have become, your strength, your coldness, your refusal to depend on anyone. But it has also limited you. bound you to a single story about the world. What story? The story that love makes you vulnerable, that caring is weakness, that the only safety lies in being harder and crueler than the things that would hurt you. Conan, both of him, child and adult, felt the truth of the words. He had spent his entire life running from this moment, building walls to contain it, becoming someone who could never be that helpless again. But in the running, in the building, in the becoming, he had lost something, the capacity for connection, the willingness to trust, the part of himself that could love without fear. You cannot undo what happened, Kull continued. The raiders came. Your father died. Your mother was taken. These things are fixed, unchangeable, woven into the fabric of your existence. But you can change what they mean. You can let go of the story you built around them and tell a different story. What different story? That is for you to decide. But the first step is simple. Feel what you have been refusing to feel. Let the grief exist. Let the terror exist. Stop running. Conan stopped running. He let himself be 5 years old, hiding in a grain pit, listening to his world, and he let the terror wash over him without trying to escape it. He let the grief rise up, grief for his father, grief for his mother, grief for the child he had been and the man he had become. He cried, not the controlled tears of an adult, measured and managed, the raw, ugly sobbing of a child who has lost everything and doesn't understand why. His small body shook with it. His small lungs heaved. His small hands clutched the wooden horse, as if it were the only solid thing in a universe that turned to smoke. And somewhere in the crying, something shifted. The terror was still there, it would always be there, part of the bedrock of his existence. But it was no longer a prison. It was simply a fact, a piece of his history. One moment among millions that had made him who he was. He could hold it without being crushed by it. Yes, Paul said, like that. Not fighting, not fleeing, not building walls, just holding, being present to what is, without demanding that it be different. The palace began to dissolve around Conan. The moments that made up its walls were coming apart, releasing him, letting time resume its normal flow. He was 19 again, scarred, weathered, marked by everything he had survived. But something had changed. Some weight that he had carried since childhood had been set down, and he could stand straighter without it. The palace of backward time shows us our past, Kull said. Not to change it, that is impossible, but to understand it, to see how the events we survived have shaped the people we became, and to choose, consciously, whether we want to continue being shaped by those events. I don't want to forget what happened. Forgetting is not the goal. Integration is the goal. Your past is part of you, but it does not have to define you. The child who hid in the grain pit is still there, still hiding, still terrified. But you are more than that child now. You can be the one who protects him, the one who holds him, the one who tells him that the terror will pass, and he will survive. Conan stood in a landscape that was neither the palace, nor the forest, nor anything he recognized. Just open space, empty and clean, waiting to be filled. You are almost ready, Kull said, but there is more to discuss before you enter the heart of the labyrinth. Come, walk with me. We have much to talk about. Chapter 16. Conversations with Kull. For the first time since the journey began, they walked together. Kull materialized beside Conan, fully present, fully physical, the king of Atlantis, and Volusia striding through the impossible landscape with the easy confidence of one who had walked such places many times before. He was enormous, even standing still, but in motion. He was something more, a force of nature, given human form, a mountain that had learned to walk. You have questions, Kull said, not asking, stating a fact. Many. Ask them. We have time. They walked through a forest where the trees were made of glass, their branches tinkling in a wind that Conan could not feel. The light that filtered through them cast rainbow patterns on the ground, prismatic shadows that shifted with each step. Tell me about Atlantis, Conan said, about what it was like before the ocean took it. Kull's expression shifted, not quite sad, but touched with something old and deep. It was beautiful. a kingdom of islands, connected by bridges and boats, where the sea was not an enemy but a lover. We lived on the water, in the water, shaped by its rhythms. Our cities rose from coral and stone, white towers against blue sky. And at night, the phosphorescence lit the waves like captured stars. And you were a warrior there. I was a slave there first, a pit fighter, like you were. I killed my way to freedom, killed my way to notice, killed until the king of Illusia wanted my blade in his service. Kull smiled, and there was no nostalgia in it, only the flat acknowledgment of facts. When I took the throne of Illusia, I had already killed more men than I could count. The crown was just another kind of cage. But you took it anyway. I took it because I had nowhere else to go. I had conquered everything I could conquer with a sword. The throne was the only challenge that remained. He looked at Conan, his ancient eyes measuring. You will understand someday. The hunger that drives men like us cannot be satisfied by killing. It demands more, always more, until the only thing left to conquer is yourself. They walked in silence for a while, the glass trees singing around them. The serpent men, Conan said eventually. I've heard stories, legends. They were not legends. They were real, more real, in some ways, than the humans they lived among. Shape-changers, wearing human faces so perfectly that you could not tell them apart from the people they replaced. Kull's jaw tightened. I learned to trust no one, not my advisors, not my guards, not even the face I saw in the mirror. Anyone could be a serpent. Anyone could be waiting to strike. That sounds like madness. It was madness, the rational response to an irrational situation. When reality itself becomes suspect, when the people around you might not be people at all. What is sanity? What is trust? Kull shook his head. I spent years in that state, watching everyone, trusting no one, waiting for the betrayal that I was certain would come. And it did come, eventually, but not from where I expected. Where? From myself, from the part of me that had become so focused on enemies that I could no longer see allies. I pushed away everyone who might have helped me until I was truly alone, until the only company I had was my suspicion. His voice dropped. That is the real danger of the serpent men. Not their fangs, not their venom, but the paranoia they breed, the isolation they cause. They win when you stop trusting, because a man who trusts no one has already defeated himself. Conan thought about the raiders, about Varn's gang, about the life he had lived since leaving Cimmeria. He had trusted no one either, had kept himself apart, held himself separate, refused to let anyone close enough to hurt him. How did you break free? He asked. From the paranoia? A friend, Brule the Spirit Slayer, a pig who had no reason to serve me and every reason to hate me. He stood by me when everyone else had fallen away, not because I had earned his loyalty, but because he chose to give it. Kull's expression softened. There is a phrase in the old Atlantean tongue, Kan Namaka Ledgeroma. It means we are of one blood, you and I. Brule spoke those words to me, and I learned slowly, painfully to believe them. And that broke the spell. It cracked it. Nothing breaks completely. We carry our scars forever. But Brule taught me something that the serpent men could never understand. That trust is not a calculation. It is a gift. You give it knowing that it might be betrayed, accepting the risk, because the alternative is to live alone in a fortress of suspicion. The glass forest thinned around them, giving way to open plains beneath a sky filled with stars that Conan did not recognize. The stars moved as he watched, tracing patterns across the darkness, writing messages in languages he could not read. You have learned many lessons on this journey, Kull said. You have been destroyed and rebuilt, broken and reformed. But there is one lesson that I cannot teach you, one truth that you must discover for yourself in the heart of the labyrinth. What truth? That reality is a dream, and dreams are reality, and the boundary between them is a story you tell yourself, no more solid than the line between waking and sleeping. The centaur said the same thing. The scent, or the tree, or whatever it was, spoke truth. But speaking truth is not the same as understanding it. You can hear the words, can repeat them, can even believe them intellectually, but but until you experience the truth directly, it remains just words. How do I experience it? Kull stopped walking. They had reached the edge of a cliff, though cliff was not quite the right word. It was more like a boundary, a place where the landscape simply ended and something else began. Below them, or beyond them, or inside them the labyrinth waited. It was impossible to perceive directly. Conan's eyes kept sliding off it, refusing to focus, unable to process what they were seeing. Walls that were also corridors, paths that were also destinations, a structure that existed in dimensions the human mind was not equipped to comprehend. The labyrinth shows you truth by showing you yourself, Kull said. Not the self you think you are, the self you actually are, and the difference between those two things. That is where the lesson lies. What will I find at the center? Me, but not me as I am now. Me as something else, a mirror, a test, a confrontation. We will face each other, ancestor and descendant, and what happens in that meeting will determine whether you leave this place transformed or lost. Will we fight? Kull smiled a fierce expression, full of anticipation. We will do whatever is necessary. Fighting may be part of it, or it may be something else entirely. The labyrinth will show us what we need. He turned to face Conan fully, the king of Atlantis, regarding his distant heir with eyes that had seen the rise and fall of civilizations. You are ready, as ready as anyone can be, but before you enter, I want you to understand something. What? I did not bring you here to break you. The deaths, the trials, the destruction of everything you thought you were, these were not punishments. They were gifts. The world breaks everyone, Conan. The question is whether you break in ways that make you stronger, or in ways that leave you shattered. And you think I've broken in the right ways? I think you have survived things that would have destroyed most men. I think you have found pieces of yourself that most men never look for. And I think, Kull paused, something almost like affection crossing his ancient face. I think you carry my blood well, better than many who have carried it before you. The words landed somewhere deep in Conan's chest, in a place he had not known existed. Thank you, he said. Thank me after the labyrinth, if you still can. Kull stepped back, and the boundary between the cliff and the impossible structure below seemed to flex, to open, to invite. Go, find the center, find me, and find the truth that waits for both of us. Conan looked at the labyrinth, or tried to look at it, his eyes still refusing to cooperate. Then he looked back at Kull, at the king, who had guided him through death after death, who had pushed and challenged and refused to let him give up. I'll see you at the center, he said, and he stepped off the edge, into the labyrinth, into whatever waited below. Chapter 17. The beetle's wisdom. The fall lasted forever and no time at all. Conan tumbled through spaces that should not have existed, past walls that were also doors, that were also mirrors, that were also nothing at all. He tried to orient himself up, down, forward, backward, but the directions kept changing, trading places, merging into a single continuous motion that was all directions and none. He landed on something that felt like stone but looked like water, a surface that rippled beneath his feet but supported his weight, that was solid and liquid simultaneously. Above him, the sky was made of gears, massive clockwork mechanisms turning in patterns too complex to follow, their teeth interlocking in equations that described the fabric of reality itself. And before him, sitting on a throne of crystallized light, was the sage. He was ancient, older than Kull, older than the centaurs, older perhaps than anything else Conan had encountered in this place between places. His robes were made of woven darkness, the absence of light given form and draped around a body so thin it seemed barely there. His face was kind, his eyes filled with a wisdom that transcended any single lifetime. Sit, the sage said, and his voice carried harmonics that made Conan's bones resonate. We have much to discuss, and the labyrinth does not wait patiently. Conan sat on the waterstone, cross-legged, facing the figure on the throne of light. You are not what you appear to be, he said. Nothing here is what it appears to be. But the appearance is not a lie, it is a translation. Your mind cannot perceive what I truly am, so it creates a form it can understand. The form is real, even if the reality beneath it is different from what you see, like the centaurs, like everything. The labyrinth speaks in symbols because symbols are the only language your consciousness can process. The deaths you experienced were symbols. The conversations were symbols. Even I am a symbol representation of something that has no name in any human tongue. Conan considered this. Then what am I supposed to learn from you? The same thing you have been learning all along, but from a different angle. The sage leaned forward, his dark robes shifting around him. You have discovered that you are not your body, that you are not your thoughts, that you are not your purpose or your rage or your history. What remains? The witness, the core, the thing that observes. Yes, but what is that thing? What is its nature? I don't know. It's empty. Just awareness without content. Exactly. Empty awareness. Consciousness without an object. The observer without the observed. The sage's eyes gleam. Now consider. If consciousness is empty, if it has no inherent content, then what gives it shape? What fills it? What makes one moment of awareness different from another? Conan thought about it. His experiences had been shaped by what he perceived: the wolves, the water, the fire. But the witness that observed those experiences had been the same throughout. Content changed. The container did not. The content comes from outside, he said slowly, from whatever consciousness is observing. Yes, but here is the deeper truth. There is no outside. Content and the container are not separate things. They arise together moment by moment, each creating the other. The observer creates the observed, and the observed creates the observer. They are two aspects of the single process, a process that has no beginning and no end, but simply is, eternally and infinitely. That doesn't make sense. It is not supposed to make sense. Sense is a function of the conceptual mind, and the truth I am describing exists beyond concepts. It can only be pointed at, never captured. Finger that points at the moon is not the moon. The sage rose from his throne, moving with a grace that belied his apparent age. He walked to where Conan sat, and knelt before him, bringing their faces level. You have been seeking deaths, he said, seeking the end of fear, the destruction of limitation, the transcendence of the small self that suffers and struggles. This is a noble seeking, but there is a secret hidden in it, a truth that transforms everything. What secret? That you cannot experience your own death. Only in life, the witness that you are cannot be destroyed, because destruction is something that happens to objects, and the witness is not an object. It is the space in which objects appear and disappear. It watches death happen, but it does not die. The words landed with a weight that Conan felt in his bones. He had experienced death 7 times now, each one complete, each one absolute, and yet here he was, still aware, still observing, still being. If I can't die, he said, then what was the point of the deaths? To show you that you can't die, to prove it through direct experience, so that the knowledge lies in your cells and not just in your concepts. The sage's eyes held his. Fear of death is the root of all other fears. When you know, truly know, in your blood and bones that death cannot touch what you really are, then fear has nothing to hold on to. You become fearless, not through courage, not through will, but through understanding. The centaurs said that the labyrinth and the waking world are the same. They are. Both are dreams, patterns of experience arising in consciousness, appearing real while they last, dissolving when their time is done. The difference is not in their substance, but in your belief. You believe the waking world is real because you have been taught to believe it. You believe this place is a dream because it does not match your expectations. But both beliefs are arbitrary. Both worlds are equally real and equally dreamlike. Conan stared at the sage, at his ancient face and kind eyes, and felt something shifting in his perception. The waterstone beneath him, the clockwork sky above, the throne of crystallized light that were no more or less real than the wasteland where his body lay, and the village where Varn's gang had committed its atrocity, and the Cimmerian hills where he had been born. All of it was a dream, and all of it was real, and the difference between those statements was nothing. I think I'm starting to understand, he said. Good. Hold that understanding lightly. Don't try to grasp it or crystallize it. Let it remain fluid, alive, open to revision. The sage smiled, and in that smile was something infinite. The labyrinth will test this understanding. At its center you will face the final confrontation not with an enemy, but with the truth itself. What happens there will depend on how well you have absorbed what you have learned. And if I haven't absorbed it well enough, then you will remain in the labyrinth, not as a punishment, as a continuation. You will keep experiencing, keep learning, keep dying and being reborn, until the lesson is complete. The sage began to fade, his form growing transparent, the throne of light dimming behind him. "Wait," Conan said. "I have more questions. You will always have more questions. That is the nature of consciousness. It questions. It seeks, it reaches for what lies beyond its current understanding. But the answers are not in the questions. They are in the silence between them." The sage was almost gone now, barely visible against the impossible landscape. "One more thing," his voice came, faint as a whisper. "When you reach the center, remember, the truth is not something you find. It is something you are. It has been with you all along, hiding in plain sight, waiting for you to stop looking and simply see." And then he was gone. Conan sat alone on the water stone, beneath the clockwork sky, and realized that the sage had been sitting on his hand. Not a throne, not a figure, a beetle, a small, iridescent beetle, crawling across his palm. Everything the beetle had said was true. Everything was wisdom, but the beetle was just the beetle that had always been a beetle, and whatever intelligence had spoken through it was something else entirely, something that used forms without being limited by them. Conan laughed, not bitterly, with wonder, with something approaching joy. He had argued philosophy with an insect, and the insect had been right. "Now you understand," Kull's voice said, warm with approval. "The wisdom is not diminished by its source. The truth is not less true because it came from a beetle, or a tree, or a hallucination. What matters is what you do with it." The beetle crawled off Conan's hand and disappeared into the water stone, leaving no trace. The labyrinth waited. Chapter 18. The threshold. Conan stood at the entrance to the final passage. Behind him lay everything he had experienced: the deaths, the lessons, the conversations with beings that might have been real or imagined or something in between. The centaurtory, the palace of backward time, the sage beetle, each one a piece of a puzzle that was only now beginning to resolve into a picture he could almost comprehend. Before him lay the labyrinth, its heart. It was not what he expected. He had imagined walls and corridors, twisty paths and dead ends, the classic structure of a maze, designed to confuse and disorient. Instead, he saw nothing, an emptiness so complete that it seemed to negate the concept of space itself. Now gray, like the despair, this was different. This was the absence of absence, the nothing that existed before something, the pregnant void from which all reality emerged. "This is the threshold," Kull said. His voice came from everywhere and nowhere, suffused through the emptiness like perfume through air. "Beyond this point I cannot guide you. What you find at the center must be found alone." "What will I find?" "Yourself." "Me." "The truth. All the same thing, seen from different angles." "Will it hurt?" "That depends on you, on how tightly you hold to what must be released, on how willing you are to see what must be seen." A pause. "But I will tell you this. I have made this journey thousands of years ago. In the ruins of my own world, I ate the sacred fungi and walked the paths you are walking. I found what waits at the center, and I emerged changed. Changed how? In every way, and in no way at all. I was still Kull, still the barbarian who had fought his way to a throne, still the king who had learned to trust no one. But I understood things I had not understood before. I saw connections I had been blind to. I became complete. Not perfect, I was never perfect, but whole. The pieces that had been scattered came together." Conan looked at the emptiness before him. It did not seem threatening, but then the mushrooms had not seemed threatening either. And look where they had led. "Any advice?" "Only this. Do not try to control what happens. The center will show you what it shows you. Your task is to witness, to accept, to integrate. If you fight the vision, it will fight back. If you surrender to it, it will surrender to you. You've said that before, about surrender. Because it is the most important lesson. Not passive surrender, not giving up, not lying down, not allowing yourself to be destroyed. Active surrender, choosing to accept what is, not because you are weak, but because acceptance is the only sane response to a universe that does not bend to your will. Conan thought about the deaths he had experienced. The wolves, the water, the fire, the earth, each one had demanded surrender, had forced him to stop fighting and simply experience. And each time he had surrendered, something new had emerged. A lesson, a piece of understanding, a step toward whatever waited at the center. "I'm ready," he said. "I know you are. I have been watching you since the beginning, guiding where I could, testing where I had to. You have surpassed every expectation. Whatever happens at the center, know this. You have earned the right to be there." The words landed somewhere deep in Conan's chest, in the place where the 5-year-old boy still hid, still clutching his wooden horse, still waiting for someone to tell him that the terror would end. "Thank you," he said, "for everything. Thank me after, if the thanks are still warranted." And then Kull's voice was gone, and Conan was alone at the threshold of the final test. He did not hesitate. He had hesitated enough in his life, at the village with Varn's gang, in the wasteland, when the mushrooms beckoned, at every moment, when moving forward meant facing something he did not want to face. He was done hesitating. He stepped into the emptiness, and the labyrinth swallowed him whole. End of Part 4. The Impossible Lands. Part 5. The Labyrinth. Chapter 19. The Maze of Selves. The emptiness was not empty. Conan understood this as soon as he stepped through the threshold. The nothing that he had perceived from outside was actually everything, compressed so tightly that it appears absence, like a night sky that seems dark until you look closer and realize it is filled with stars beyond counting. The void of the labyrinth contained infinities, and then the infinities began to unfold. Walls materialized around him, not stone or glass or any material he could name. The boundaries of pure meaning. Edges where one possibility ended and another began. Corridors stretched in directions that had no correspondence to his understanding of space, branching and reconnecting in patterns that seemed to describe the architecture of thought itself. He was inside his own mind, or inside mind itself, the vast structure of consciousness that underlay all experience, all reality, all being. He was not alone. The first version of himself appeared at a junction where 3 corridors met. It was him as he might have been, a Conan who had never left Cimmeria, who had stayed among his people, who had become a hunter and a father and an elder of his tribe. This Conan was older, weathered by decades of hard winters, but his eyes held a peace that the real Conan had never known. "You came," the other Conan said. His voice was rough, accented differently, shaped by a life lived entirely in the northern hills. "I wondered if you would." "Who are you?" "I am what you chose not to be, the path you did not take. When you left Cimmeria after the raid, you could have stayed instead, could have found another clan, could have rebuilt your life among your own people. I am what would have happened if you had." Conan studied his other self. The hunter looked content, settled in a way that the real Conan had never been. He wore furs rather than armor, carried a hunting bow rather than a sword, bore the scars of animal encounters rather than human combat. "Are you happy?" Conan asked. "Happy enough. I have a wife, 3 children, a place in my community. I have not seen the wonders you have seen, have not faced the horrors you have faced. My life has been smaller than yours, but also more peaceful. Do you regret it? The smaller life?" The hunter Conan considered the question. "Sometimes I wonder what lies beyond the hills. Sometimes I dream of cities and oceans and battles that shake the world. But wondering is not the same as wanting. I chose what I chose, and I have lived with that choice." He gestured down one of the corridors, a path that seemed to lead deeper into the labyrinth, toward something Conan could not see. "You must keep moving. There are others waiting to meet you. I was only the first. Others? All the versions of yourself that you might have been. All the choices you did not make. The labyrinth is made of them, every fork in your path, every moment when your life could have gone differently. You must walk through them to reach the center. The hunter Conan stepped aside, and the corridor beyond him opened, beckoning. Conan walked through. The next version was darker. He found this Conan in a chamber made of shadow, its walls dripping with something that looked like blood but might have been regret. This version was older too, but differently aged by cruelty rather than time, his face carved into a permanent sneer, his eyes holding nothing but contempt. "So," the dark Conan said, "the soft one arrives." "Soft? You left the gang. When Varn ordered the massacre, you ran. I stayed." The dark Conan smiled, and there was no warmth in it. "I did what needed to be done. I rose through the ranks. Now I lead my own band of raiders, and we take what we want, and no one dares stand against us." Conan looked at this version of himself, the version that had not walked away from Corval, that had participated in the atrocity, that had let the darkness in and let it grow until there was nothing else left. "You're a monster," he said. "I am what you could have been, what you almost were." The dark Conan's smile widened. "Do you think there is that much difference between us? We have the same blood, the same instincts, the same capacity for violence. The only difference is that you ran from what you are, and I embraced it. There's more to me than violence." "Is there? Without the violence, what are you? A farmer? A philosopher?" "You were made for killing, Conan. Every scar on your body proves it. Every death you've dealt confirms it. The only question is whether you kill for survival or for pleasure, and in the end, does the distinction even matter to the dead?" Conan felt the truth in the words, the uncomfortable recognition that this dark version was not a stranger, but a possibility that had always lived inside him. The rage he had integrated in the dungeon, the shadow he had accepted, they came from the same source as this monster before him. "The difference matters," he said. "To me it matters. For now. But wait until the world has beaten you down enough. Wait until everyone you care about has been taken from you. Everyone who trusted you has been betrayed by circumstance. Eventually the distinction between survival and pleasure disappears, and there is only the killing, and the power, and the freedom of being the one who makes others afraid." The dark Conan stepped aside, and behind him was another corridor, leading deeper. "Keep walking, soft one. See how many versions of yourself you have to face before you reach the truth." Conan walked through, and the shadows closed behind him. The versions multiplied. He met himself as a slave, broken by years of captivity, his spirit crushed, his eyes empty of everything except the desire to survive another day. He met himself as a king old now, seated on a throne that might have been Apollonia's, wearing a crown that seemed too heavy for his grey head. This king, Conan, looked at him with tired eyes and said, "It is worth it. The burden and the loneliness and the endless compromise. It is worth it, because someone must rule, and better a barbarian who knows what it means to suffer than a nobleman who has never known anything but privilege." He met himself as a corpse, lying on a battlefield, staring at the sky with eyes that saw nothing. This version could not speak, but its presence was a message nonetheless. This is how it ends. One way or another, this is always how it ends. He met himself as a child, the 5-year-old hiding in the grain pit, still clutching the wooden horse his father had carved. This version looked up at him with eyes full of terror and asked, "Does it get better? Does the fear ever stop?" Conan knelt beside his younger self, placed a hand on the boy's shoulder, felt the trembling. "It gets different," he said. "The fear changes, becomes something else, something you can carry, instead of something that carries you. Will you protect me?" "I will try. I have always been trying, even when I didn't know that's what I was doing." The child, Conan looked at him for a long moment, then nodded and faded, leaving only the wooden horse behind. Conan picked it up. It was warm in his hand, solid, real in a way that nothing else in the labyrinth had been. He carried it with him as he walked deeper. The versions became stranger. He met himself as something that was not quite human, a Conan who had made bargains with dark powers, whose body had been transformed into something monstrous, whose strength had been purchased at the cost of everything that made life worth living. This version begged him not to follow the same path. its voice a rasping plea from a throat that had forgotten how to speak without pain. He met himself as something that was more than human, a Conan who had achieved some kind of transcendence, who floated in light and spoke in riddles, who seemed to have left behind everything that Conan recognized as himself. This version smiled at him and said, "All paths lead here, even the darkest, even the most painful. Trust the journey." He met versions that contradicted each other, that claimed to be the real Conan, that argued with each other about which choices had been right and which had been wrong. He met versions that did not recognize him at all, that looked through him as if he were the ghost, and they were the reality. And with each meeting, something shifted in his understanding. These were not enemies. They were not obstacles. They were pieces of himself, the roads not taken, the possibilities unexplored, the infinite potential that every human being carries within them. He was not walking through a maze. He was walking through himself, seeing all the ways he could have been, accepting them as part of the whole. The labyrinth was not trying to trap him. It was trying to show him. The final version appeared at a junction that seemed to be the center of something, a place where all the corridors converged, where all the possibilities met. This Conan was neither younger nor older, neither darker nor lighter, neither more nor less than the Conan who looked at him. This Conan was exactly the same, a perfect mirror, indistinguishable in every detail. "You," Conan said. "Me," the mirror agreed. "Or you. The distinction is arbitrary. What are you supposed to teach me?" "Nothing. I am not a teacher. I am a question." The mirror Conan tilted his head, studying himself with curious eyes. "After all these versions, all these paths not taken, all these possibilities, who do you think you are? Not who you were, not who you might have been. Who are you right now, standing at the center of all your choices?" Conan thought about it. He had seen himself as hunter and raider, slave and king, child and corpse. He had seen the best and worst of his potential, the heights and depths of what he was capable of. And through it all, something had remained constant, not a personality, not a set of traits, but something simpler and more fundamental. "I am the one who chooses," he said. "All these versions are possible because I have the capacity to become any of them. But I am not any of them. I am the choosing itself, the awareness that selects one path over another, the witness that watches the choice being made." The mirror Conan smiled not with satisfaction, but with recognition. "Yes, now you understand. You are not your history, not your potential, not even your current form. You are the choosing, the witness, the core that remains constant while everything else changes." The mirror began to fade, but its voice continued. "Remember this when you face what waits at the center. He will try to convince you that you are something else, something solid, something fixed, something that can be defeated. He is wrong. You cannot be defeated, because you are not a thing that can lose. You are the awareness that watches losing happen, and awareness cannot be destroyed." The mirror was gone. The junction was empty, and ahead, through a doorway that had not been there before, Conan could see something waiting. A room, a presence, the center of a labyrinth. He stepped through. Chapter 20. The mirror room. The room was made of mirrors, not the shifting, uncertain reflections of the labyrinth. These were true mirrors, perfect surfaces that showed exactly what was there without distortion or interpretation. They lined every wall, covered the ceiling, formed the floor beneath his feet. Wherever Conan looked, he saw himself looking back, but the reflections were not quite right. They did not move when he moved. They did not blink when he blinked. They stood still, frozen, staring at him with eyes that held their own awareness, their own presence. They were not copies, they were witnesses, observers. A jury assembled to judge something that Conan did not yet understand. He walked to the center of the room, his footsteps silent on the mirrored floor, and stopped. "I know you're watching," he said. "All of you, whatever you are." The reflections did not respond, but something in the room shifted, a quality of attention, a weight of regard. The mirrors were not passive surfaces. They were active participants in whatever was about to happen. Conan looked at the nearest reflection. It showed him exactly as he was 19 years old, scarred by violence, weathered by hardship, carrying in his posture and his expression the accumulated weight of everything he had survived. Not the legend he would become, not the king he might one day be, just Conan, the young Cimmerian, standing at the center of an impossible room in a place between places. "What am I supposed to see?" he asked. The reflection's mouth moved, though Conan's own did not. "Everything. Nothing. Yourself. I've been seeing myself for the whole labyrinth. Versions upon versions. What's different here? Those were possibilities. Interpretations. Stories you tell yourself about who you might be. This is simpler. This is just you. No story. No interpretations. Just the truth of what you are, right now, without addition or subtraction." Conan looked deeper into the mirror, past his face, past his body, past all the external markers of identity. He looked for the thing that looked. The awareness behind the eyes, the witness that had been present through every death and every lesson. He found nothing, not emptiness that would be something, not darkness that would also be something, just an absence of self where he had expected to find a self, just a looking, without anyone doing the looking. That is the truth, the reflection said. There is no Conan at the center of Conan. There is only awareness, shaped by circumstance, identified with a body and a history and a name, but none of those things are the awareness itself. They are costumes worn by something that has no inherent form. If I'm nothing, then what have I been doing? What have all these deaths meant? What has any of it been for? The deaths were for this, to strip away everything that is not essential, until only the essential remains. You have lost your body many times and found that you persist. You have lost your mind and found that you persist. You have lost your meaning and your rage and your history, and still you persist. What persists? The witness, the core. And what is the witness? What is the core? When you look for it, what do you find? Nothing, Conan said. I find nothing. Exactly. The witness is not a thing. It is the space in which things appear. You cannot see it, because it is not an object of perception. It is perception itself. You cannot grasp it, because it is not something that can be held. It is the holding itself. You are looking for yourself, and you cannot find yourself, because you are the looking. Conan stood with that understanding, letting it settle into his bones. He had spent his entire life assuming that there was a Conan, the solid, continuous self that moved through the world, that made choices, that had experiences. But the labyrinth had shown him that this self was a construction, a story, a pattern imposed on something that had no inherent pattern. He was not the pattern. He was the space in which the pattern appeared. Now the reflection said, and this time all of them spoke together. The chorus of voices that was somehow also one voice. You are ready for the center, for the confrontation, for the truth. The mirrors began to change. The frozen reflections came to life, turning away from Conan, walking toward a point behind him. He turned to follow their movement, and saw that a door had appeared in the mirrored wall, a door that led to something beyond. He is waiting, the reflection said. Go to him. Face what you came here to face. Conan walked toward the door. The wooden horse from his childhood was still in his hand. He had forgotten he was carrying it. But now it felt heavy, significant, a talisman from a world that seemed very far away. He pushed the door open and stepped through into the center of the labyrinth. Chapter 21. The confrontation. Kull was waiting. The room was circular, its walls made of something that looked like solidified starlight, its ceiling open to a sky that held galaxies instead of stars. In the center of the room was an empty space, and in that empty space stood the king of Atlantis, the ancestor who had guided Conan through death after death, lesson after lesson. But Kull was different here. He was larger than before, not just taller, but more present, as if his existence had weight that pressed against the fabric of reality. His armor gleamed with a light that had no source. His eyes held depths that seemed to go on forever, and around him was an aura of power so intense that it was almost visible, almost tangible. You came, Kull said. His voice was the voice that had guided Conan through the labyrinth, but deeper now, resonating with harmonics that seemed to vibrate in dimensions beyond the three that Conan could perceive. You knew I would. I hoped you would. Some do not make it this far. The labyrinth takes them, holds them, refuses to let them reach the center. You have proven stronger than most. Conan looked at his ancestor, at the king who had been dead for millennia, but who stood before him now, as real as anything he had ever encountered. What happens now? Now we do what we came here to do. We face each other, ancestor and descendant, at the heart of all things. We test each other, challenge each other, discover which of us is worthy of the truth that waits beyond. And if neither of us is worthy, then the truth remains hidden, and we both stay here, in this place between places, until we can learn what we need to learn. Kull's ancient eyes held something that might have been amusement, but I do not think that will happen. You have learned much, and I have not forgotten what it is to be young, to be hungry, to stand at the threshold of understanding. Conan felt the weight of the moment. Everything had led to this, the mushrooms and the wasteland, the deaths and the lessons, the conversations with trees and beetles and versions of himself. All of it had been preparation for this confrontation, this meeting of blood across time. How do we do this? He asked. How do we test each other? In the only way that matters. We talk, we listen, we see if what we believe can survive the challenge of what the other believes. Kull gestured, and 2 chairs appeared in the empty space, thrones, really carved from the same solidified starlight as the walls. Sit. Let us speak as equals. For the first and perhaps the last time. Conan sat. The throne was neither comfortable nor uncomfortable, it simply was, supporting his weight without imposing any particular sensation. Kull sat across from him, the 2 barbarians facing each other across a span that was measured in thousands of years. Ask me anything, Kull said. This is your opportunity. I will answer truthfully, as I have always answered. But now there will be no distance between us, no barriers. Whatever you wish to know, I will tell you. Conan thought about all the questions he could ask about Atlantis, about the serpent men, about what it meant to be a king, about the nature of reality, and the structure of existence. But one question rose above all the others, demanding to be asked. Why me? Kull tilted his head. Why you would? Why did you choose me for this? You said you have watched your line for millennia, that thousands of descendants have carried your blood. Why did you reach across time to guide me through this journey? Kull was silent for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was softer, more personal. Because you remind me of myself, not as I was when I took the throne of Valusia, not as I was when I had mastered the lessons you are now learning, but as I was before all of that. Young, angry, broken by a world that had shown me only cruelty, looking for something to believe in, something to fight for, something to be. That's not an answer. It is the only answer I have. I chose you because you needed to be chosen, and because I recognized that need, and because the blood that flows in your veins called out to me across the ages. Kull leaned forward, his eyes intense. You think this is about you? It is not. It is about what you will become, what you will do, what you will mean to a world that does not yet know how much it will need you. What will I become? I cannot tell you that. The future is not fixed. It is shaped by choices, by actions, by the endless interplay of will and circumstance. But I have seen possibilities, glimpses, futures where you become something extraordinary, something the world has not seen since my time, since the age of heroes and legends. And futures where I don't. Those too. Futures where you die young, where you give into the darkness, where you become everything you fear becoming. The labyrinth has shown you some of those possibilities. They are real. They are always real. Conan sat with that, the king in the courts, the hunter and the raider, all the versions of himself that he had met in the maze, all the paths that branched from this moment into infinities of possibility. How do I become the good version? He asked. How do I choose the right path? You don't. You cannot guarantee outcomes, cannot control the future, cannot ensure that your choices will lead where you want them to lead. All you can do is choose moment by moment, decision by decision, and trust that the choosing itself is what matters. That doesn't help. It is not supposed to help. It is supposed to be true. Kull's expression softened. You want certainty. Everyone wants certainty. But certainty is a lie We tell ourselves to avoid the terror of freedom. The truth is that you are free radically, absolutely free, and that freedom means you can become anything, and that anything includes the best and the worst of what humanity is capable of. Then, what's the point of the lessons? What's the point of any of this? The point is to prepare you, not to guarantee your success. Nothing can guarantee that, but to give you the tools you will need to face whatever comes. The understanding that you are not your body, not your thoughts, not your history. The knowledge that fear dissolves when you see through its illusions. The wisdom that comes from dying 1,000 deaths and discovering that death cannot touch what you really are. Kull stood, and his presence seemed to fill the room, to press against the walls of solidified starlight. These are not guarantees. They are advantages. They are the inheritance that pass to you, not gold or land or power, but something more valuable, the ability to face the unknown without flinching, the capacity to accept the unacceptable, the willingness to act when action seems impossible. Conan stood as well. They faced each other now, the two barbarians, separated by millennia but united by blood and by understanding. Is that the truth you promised? The thing that waits at the center? Part of it. The rest. Kull smiled, and in that smile was something ancient and fierce and almost tender. The rest you will have to take from me. Take from you? How? The way we have always settled things. The way our people have always settled things. Kull drew his sword, a blade of bronze and silver that seemed to hum with contained power. One final test. Not of your strength, I am stronger than you, and we both know it. Not of your skill, I have had millennia to perfect my technique, but of your understanding, of what you have learned. Conan drew his own sword, feeling its weight in his hand, knowing that it was no match for the weapon Kull held. How can I win a fight? I can't win. That, Kull said, raising his blade, is the question, and the answer is the truth you came here to find. He attacked. Chapter 22. The Battle. Kull's first strike should have killed him. It came faster than anything Conan had ever faced, faster than the wolves in the black glass plain, faster than thought itself. The blade was a line of silver fire cutting through the air where Conan's head had been a fraction of a second before. But Conan was not there. Some instinct had moved him before his conscious mind registered the attack, his body flowing aside like water, his own sword coming up in a counter that Kull batted away with contemptuous ease. Good, Kull said, pressing the attack. Your reflexes are sharp, but reflexes will not save you. The next exchange was brutal. Kull's blade came from angles that should have been impossible, each strike carrying enough force to shatter stone. Conan defended desperately, giving ground, his arm already aching from the impacts. He was outmatched, completely, utterly outmatched. Kull had been fighting for thousands of years. Conan had been fighting for barely a decade. Kull had the strength of something more than human. Conan had only the strength of a very strong man. Every exchange drove this home. Every moment widened the gap between what Conan could do and what was being done to him. You cannot win by fighting. The mere reflections had said, he will try to convince you that you are something that can be defeated. Conan parried another strike, felt his sword nearly ripped from his grip by the force of it. He was being hurted. He realized, pushed toward the wall of the room, where his movement would be limited, where Kull's advantages would become insurmountable. You are not a thing that can lose. You are the awareness that watches losing happen. He stopped retreating. Kull's next attack came, and instead of defending, Conan simply stood. The blade struck him, should have struck him, but somehow passed through him without resistance, without damage, as if he were made of smoke. Kull's eyes widened. What? I'm not here to fight, Conan said. His voice was calm, detached as if it were coming from somewhere far away. I'm here to understand, and I can't understand while I'm focused on surviving. He dropped his sword. It clattered on the floor of solidified starlight, the sound impossibly loud in the sudden silence. This is not courage, Kull said. This is suicide. It's neither. It's surrender. Not to you, to the lesson, to the truth. Kull attacked again, but this time Conan did not try to avoid the blade. He simply observed it, watched it approach, noticed the way the light played off its edge, The way Kull's muscles moved as he swung. The way time seemed to stretch around the moment of impact. The blade passed through him. Again, like cutting water, like striking at a reflection. You cannot experience your own death. Only in life. I understand now, Conan said. The fight was never the point. The fight was a distraction, a way of keeping me focused on something I could lose. I can't lose what I'm not, and I'm not my body, not my history, not even this version of myself standing in front of you. I'm the awareness that watches all of those things come and go. Kull lowered his sword. His expression was unreadable surprise, perhaps, or satisfaction, or something more complex than either. You have learned faster than I did, he said. When I faced this test, I fought for 3 days before I understood. You reached the truth in minutes. You guided me well. The deaths, the lessons, they prepared me for this. They prepared you to be ready for this. Understanding it was your own achievement. Kull sheathed his sword, the blade disappearing into a scabbard that had not been visible before. The fight is over. You have won. I didn't win. I stopped playing. That is the same thing. The only way to win a fight you cannot win is to realize that fighting is not required. The only way to defeat an opponent who is stronger than you is to stop being an opponent at all. They stood facing each other. No longer combatants, but something else, two men who had touched the same truth, who had walked the same path, who understood each other in ways that words could not capture. What happens now? Conan asked. Now the truth reveals itself, the thing you came here to find, the lesson that underlies all the other lessons. The room began to change around them. The walls of solidified starlight became transparent, then dissolved entirely, revealing something beyond not space, not void, but something that Conan had no words for. Look, Kull said, and see. Chapter 20. 3. The Truth. Reality was a dream. Conan saw it now not as a concept, not as words spoken by centaurs or beetles or ancient kings, but as direct experience. The labyrinth, the wasteland, the waking world, they were all made of the same substance, woven from the same threads, dreamed by the same dreamer. He could see the structure of it, the way each moment arose from nothing and dissolved back into nothing, the way each experience was created fresh in each instant, the way time and space and matter were all appearances rather than substances. There was no solid ground anywhere, no foundation that could be trusted to hold. Everything was in flux, in motion, in constant creation and destruction. And yet it was all still here. The labyrinth existed, even though it was a dream. Kull existed, even though he had been dead for millennia. Conan existed, even though he was made of nothing more substantial than awareness and pattern. Do you see? Kull asked, and his voice seemed to come from everywhere at once, from the fabric of the dream itself. The dream is not less real than you thought. You are less solid than you thought. Both things are true. Both things have always been true. If everything is a dream, then nothing matters. If everything is a dream, then everything matters equally. The suffering is real suffering, even though it is dreamed. The joy is real joy. The love, the loss, the struggle, all of it is as real as anything can be, which is to say, real enough for the one experiencing it. Conan felt the truth of this. The deaths he had experienced in the labyrinth had been real deaths, the pain had been real pain, the fear had been real fear. The fact that they were part of a dream did not diminish them. It simply placed them in context. Then what's the point? He asked. What's the lesson? The lesson is fearlessness. The lesson is freedom. Kull was beside him now, or maybe part of him, or maybe the same thing looked at from a different angle. You cannot experience your own death, Conan. Only in life. The dream will continue until it doesn't. And when it doesn't, you will not be there to notice. There is no ending to fear, because there is no ending for the one who fears. So I should stop being afraid. Fear will arise when it arises. That is its nature. But you no longer need to believe in it, to be controlled by it, to let it determine your choices. You have seen behind the curtain. You know what you are, and what you are cannot be threatened by anything that happens in the dream. Conan absorbed this. The understanding settled into him, not as knowledge, but as being a fundamental shift in the way he related to existence itself. "The land called Death," he said. "That's what I told the survivors I was going to find. A place older than Atlantis at the end of the world. Yes, and now you understand what that means." Kull's voice was warm, almost tender. "Death is not a place. Death is what you have been seeking all along, the confrontation with the ultimate unknown, the willingness to face the thing that cannot be faced. You will walk toward death for the rest of your life, not because you want to die, but because the walking is life, because the seeking is being, because you have become the kind of man who does not turn away from anything, even the abyss. And if someone catches me, if death catches me, then you will find out what comes next, and it will be an adventure, like everything else. But I do not think death will catch you easily. I think you have learned something that most men never learn, how to be fully present, fully alive in every moment. And that presence is the only immortality that exists." The dream around them was beginning to shift, to change, to move toward something else. Conan could feel it, the pull of the waking world, the body lying in the wasteland, the life that waited for him beyond the labyrinth. "I have to go back," he said. "Yes, the journey here was necessary, but it was always meant to lead you back. The lessons you have learned are not for this place. They are for the world you came from, for the life you have yet to live. Will I see you again? I am in your blood. I am in your bone. I am in the part of you that refuses to surrender, that keeps moving forward when all reason says to stop. You will not see me, but I will be there, always, in every battle, every challenge, every moment, when you face the impossible and do it anyway." Kull placed his hand on Conan's shoulder, a gesture of kinship, of blessing, of farewell. "Kanamaka Lajarama," he said. "We are of one blood, you and I. What you do, I do through you. What you become, I become through you. Carry our blood well, descendant. Make me proud." The dream dissolved. The labyrinth dissolved. Everything dissolved. And Conan fell into darkness, and through the darkness, and into something that felt like. End of Part 5. The Labyrinth, Part 6, The Return, Chapter 24. Waking. He woke to the taste of dust. It filled his mouth, coated his tongue, gritted between his teeth. His body was a ruin, every muscle aching, every joint screaming, his skin cracked and raw from exposure. He lay face down in the dirt, his cheek pressed against ground that radiated the heat of a sun that had been beating down for hours. For a long moment he did not move, could not move. The journey through the labyrinth had taken everything from him, and even though his body had been lying here the whole time, dying slowly of thirst and exposure, while his mind walked through impossible landscapes, the exhaustion was absolute. He breathed. That was all he could manage at first. Just breathing, feeling the air enter his lungs, feeling his heartbeat in his chest. Simple things, real things, the fundamental mechanics of being alive. The wasteland stretched around him, unchanged from when he had collapsed. The same barren rocks, the same empty sky, the same ancient ruins where he had found the mushrooms. How long had he been gone? Hours? Days? The sun was lower than he remembered, painting the horizon in shades of orange and red. But that could mean anything in a place where time had no meaning. He tried to move his hand. The muscles responded barely, reluctantly, but they responded. His fingers twitched in the dust, then curled, then pressed against the ground. Progress. The memories of the labyrinth were already fading, like dreams dissolving in morning light. He could still feel the shape of them, the deaths, the lessons, the conversations with beings that might or might not have been real, but the details were becoming uncertain, fluid, hard to hold onto. Except for the truth that remained. You cannot experience your own death. Only life. The words were not a memory. They were a fact built into the architecture of his being, as much a part of him now as his scars or his muscles were the blood that flowed through his veins. He had not learned them, he had become them. The understanding was not something he knew, it was something he was. He got his hands beneath him, pushed, his arms shook with the effort, threatening to collapse. but he kept pushing until his chest left the ground, until his weight was on his palms and knees, until he was something other than a body lying in the dust. The world swayed around him. Colors bled into each other. Shapes refused to hold their form. He was still between worlds, still half in the labyrinth, still caught in the space where reality and dream overlapped. The dream is real. The reality is a dream. They are the same substance, seen from different angles. He laughed. It came out as a croak, a rasp of air through a throat that had forgotten how to make sound, but it was laughter nonetheless. He had walked through death, had faced the king of Atlantis, had discovered truths that most men would never touch, and now here he was on his hands and knees in the dirt, unable to stand, barely able to breathe. The hero's journey indeed. Standing took longer than it should have. His legs refused to cooperate at first, folding beneath him every time he tried to rise. He fell twice, 3 times, each impact driving the breath from his lungs, each failure a reminder of how close to death his body had come, while his mind was elsewhere. But he kept trying. That was what he did now, what he would always do. The spark that Kull had spoken of, the irreducible minimum of life that refused to surrender, that kept moving forward when all reason said to stop. It was not courage, not stubbornness, not any quality that could be named. It was simply what he was. He stood. The wasteland stretched around him in all directions, featureless and hostile. No water, no food, no shelter from the sun that would rise again tomorrow, and the day after that. He should be dead. By every calculation of survival, he should be dead. But the dream had not finished with him yet. He turned in a slow circle, looking for something in direction, a landmark, any sign of which way to go. The ruins where he had eaten the mushrooms were behind him, their ancient stones still radiating that strange wrongness, their shadows still hiding secrets that no human eye was meant to see. He would not go back there. Whatever the ruins were, whatever civilization had built them, it was not his concern. He had taken what he needed from them, the fungi, the journey, the truth, and now it was time to move on. But to where? The horizon was the same in every direction, empty, barren, offering no promise of water or food or anything that might keep him alive. He could walk for days and find nothing. He could walk until his body gave out and the vultures would find him, and that would be the end of the story of Conan of Cimmeria. Except he looked up. The sky was darkening, the sun nearly gone, and as the light faded, the first stars were beginning to appear, faint points of light against the deepening blue, ancient and unchanging, watching the world with the patience of things that had been there since before the first human opened their eyes to wonder at them. One star was brighter than the others. It hung just above the northern horizon, steady and unwavering, its light sharp against the surrounding darkness. Kull told him about a star that leads to a land at the end of the earth, beyond Hyboria, that was already ancient before Atlantis was built. The land called Death. He did not know if the star was real, did not know if the land existed, if there was anything at the end of the world beyond more wasteland and more suffering. But it did not matter. The seeking was the thing itself, the walking toward death, that was also the walking toward life. He faced north, faced the star, and he began to walk. His body screamed at him to stop. Every step was agony. His feet were raw, his legs trembling, his chest tight with the effort of breathing air that was too hot and too dry. He had nothing, no water, no food, no tools, no weapons except the sword that still hung at his hip, miraculously undisturbed during his collapse. He walked anyway. The night deepened around him, the heat of the day giving way to cold that seeped into his bones. He shivered as he walked, his sweats, oak clothing offering no protection against the desert chill. His teeth chattered, his hands shook, his vision narrowed until there was nothing but the star ahead of him and the ground beneath his feet. He thought about the labyrinth, about the deaths he had experienced there, the wolves, the water, the fire, the earth. Each one had been complete, absolute, a true ending of the body that housed his awareness, and each time he had returned, each time he had found himself whole again, the wounds healed, the damage undone. This was different. This was the waking world, where death was permanent, where the body did not rebuild itself, where the dead stayed dead. If he collapsed out here, there would be no resurrection, no second chance, just the slow cooling of flesh and the patient work of scavengers. You cannot experience your own death. Only in life the truth sustained him when nothing else could. He was not walking toward death. He was walking toward life, the only thing he could ever walk toward. The dream continued as long as it continued, and when it ended, he would not be there to notice. Fear was unnecessary, because fear was based on a misunderstanding, a belief that there was something to lose, a conviction that the ending was something that could be experienced. There was nothing to lose. There had never been anything to lose. He walked. The voices came to him just before dawn. At first, he thought they were another hallucination, the kind of trick that dying minds play on themselves, conjuring water in the desert, shade in the burning sun. But these voices were different. They had weight, presence, the undeniable quality of things that existed outside his own skull. He stopped, listened. Over here, I think I see something. Be careful. Could be one of them. No, look, it's just one person, and they're barely moving. Shapes appeared on the horizon, silhouettes against the lightning sky. People, real people, moving toward him with the cautious haste of those who had learned to be wary, but had not yet learned to be cruel. Conan tried to speak. What emerged was a sound barely recognizable as human, a croak, a wheeze, a plea for help that his throat was too dry to form into words. The shapes resolved into faces. A woman middle-aged, her features lined with grief and exhaustion. A man, younger, carrying a water skin. A child, clinging to the woman's hand, staring at Conan with wide eyes. Survivors. The survivors of Corval, the village that Varnsgain had destroyed. They had found him. The water was the most beautiful thing he had ever tasted. It flowed into his mouth, down his throat, into the parched emptiness of his stomach. Cool and clean and impossibly sweet. The simple gift of survival that made everything else possible. He drank until the younger man pulled the water skin away, warning him that too much too fast would make him sick. They had laid him down in the shade of a rock formation. The dozen or so survivors gathered around him in a loose circle. He recognized some of their faces. He had seen them during the raid, had watched them run and hide and plead for mercy that never came. They should hate him, should fear him, should want him dead. But they were looking at him with something else, something like hope. "We saw you leave," the middle-aged woman said. She seemed to be their leader, or at least the one who spoke for them, when the killing started. "You were one of them, we know that. We saw your face, saw you riding with the gang." Conan said nothing. What could he say? He had been there. He had been part of it, complicit in the atrocity, even if he had not participated in the worst of it. But you walked away. The woman's voice was quiet, wondering. "You were at the edge of the village, near the grain stores, and you just walked away. We watched you go." The boy Conan managed. His voice was a ruin, barely audible. "In the pit, the grain pit. My nephew." The woman's eyes filled with tears, but she did not look away. "You found him." One of the others, the one with the curved sword, he was going to. She couldn't finish the sentence, but you stopped him. You told him to ride away. "I remember. He made it. My nephew. He's with the others in the group that went ahead to find water." She reached out, touched Conan's hand. "You saved his life, the only one of them who showed any mercy, and you saved his life." Conan closed his eyes. The boy in the grain pit, the wooden horse, the face that had reminded him so much of his own, in another time, in another place, hiding from raiders while his world burned around him. "We're going south," the woman continued. "There's supposed to be a settlement a few days' walk from here, a place where we can start over, build new lives. We have some food, some water, enough to make the journey, we think." She paused, and when she spoke again, there was something like a question in her voice. "You could come with us. We need someone who can protect us, someone who knows how to fight, how to survive. You saved my nephew. You walked away from the killing when the others didn't. That makes you different, better than them, at least." Conan opened his eyes, looked at the faces gathered around him, the survivors of a massacre that he had been part of, offering him a place among them. a chance at redemption, a future that did not involve walking alone through the wasteland toward a star that might lead nowhere. It would be so easy to say yes, to accept their offer, to travel with them, to become their protector and their guardian. He could build a new life, leave behind the raging and the violence, become something other than what he had been. But even as the thought formed, he knew it was not his path. "I can't stay with you," he said. The words came easier now, the water having restored some of his voice. He sat up, his body still aching but functional, his mind clear for the first time since he had eaten the mushrooms. "You've saved my life. The water, the food, I would be dead without you. But I can't go south. I can't be what you need me to be." The woman's face fell, but there was understanding in her eyes. "Where will you go?" Conan looked at the northern horizon, where the star had been before the dawn light washed it away. It was still there, he knew, still burning, still waiting, still calling to him across the darkness. "There is a land," he said, "beyond the edges of the maps, beyond Hyboria, beyond the frozen wastes, beyond everything known. A land that was old before Atlantis rose from the sea." The survivors exchanged glances. Some of them looked concerned, others confused. The woman simply waited, her expression patient. "It is called death, and I need to find out if it exists." "Why?" Conan considered the question. How could he explain what he had learned in the labyrinth? How could he describe the truth that had been burned into his being, that death could not be experienced, that life was all there was, that the only way to be truly alive was to walk toward the darkness without flinching? "Because I need to know if I'm invincible," he said finally. "If anyone can give me what I'm seeking, the only way to know is to find out." The woman studied him for a long moment. Whatever she saw in his face, the scars, the coldness, the strange peace that had settled into his features, seemed to decide something for her. "You're not like the others," she said. "I saw that during the raid, and I see it now. There's something in you that they don't have, something that's looking for more than just survival." "Maybe. I hope you find what you're looking for." She reached into a pouch at her belt and withdrew something, a small bundle wrapped in cloth. "Take this. It's not much, but it might help." Conan accepted the bundle. Inside was dried meat, hard bread, a small water skin, enough to survive for a few days, if he was careful. "Thank you," he said, "for everything. Thank you for my nephew." The woman stood, gesturing for the others to do the same. "We need to keep moving, but I'll remember you. I'll tell people about the raider who walked away, who saved a boy's life, who went looking for a land called death." She smiled, and despite everything, the grief, the loss, the trauma of what she had survived, there was warmth in it. "Maybe someday someone will tell me what you found there." They left him with the supplies and continued south, their figures growing smaller and smaller until they disappeared over the horizon. Conan sat in the shade of the rock formation, eating slowly, drinking sparingly, letting his body recover what it could before the journey ahead. The sun climbed higher, burning away the morning chill. The wasteland shimmered with heat mirages, the air thick with the promise of another brutal day. A sensible man would have gone with the survivors, would have accepted their offer, their protection, their chance at a normal life. But Conan had never been sensible, and after the labyrinth, after everything he had learned, he understood that normalcy was not what he was seeking. The dream keeps you alive until it doesn't, and when it doesn't, you won't know anyway. He thought about Kull, about the king of Atlantis, who had walked the same path thousands of years ago. Kull had emerged from his own labyrinth and gone on to rule nations, to face enemies beyond imagining, to become a legend that persisted across millennia. Would Conan do the same? Would his name be remembered, his deeds recounted, his life transformed into stories that would outlast the civilizations that told them? He did not know, could not know. The future was not fixed, it was shaped by choices, by actions, by the endless interplay of will and circumstance. All he could do was walk forward, make decisions, face whatever came with the understanding that he had earned in the labyrinth. Seek death at every moment, not because you want to die, because the seeking makes you alive. He finished the bread, took a careful sip of water, and stood. The star was not visible in the daylight. but he knew where it was. Due north, just above the horizon, steady and patient and waiting. He would walk through the day, rest when he had to, continue when he could. He would find water or he wouldn't. He would survive or he wouldn't. The dream would continue until it ended. And when it ended, he would not be there to know. But until then, until the final moment that he would never experience, he would be alive. Fully, completely, absolutely alive. Present to every sensation, every challenge, every opportunity to test the limits of what was possible. The land called death was waiting, and Conan was ready to find it. Chapter 25. The Survivors. He walked for 3 days before he saw the mountains. They rose out of the horizon like teeth, their peaks capped with snow even in the heat of the lowland summer. The northern range, the barrier between the known world and whatever lay beyond. No one he had ever met had crossed them. No one he had ever heard of had returned from trying. They were beautiful, stark and deadly and utterly indifferent to human ambition. The mountains stood as a challenge that had broken stronger men than him. But Conan did not feel discouraged. He felt something else, a quickening in his blood, a sharpening of his attention, the recognition of a worthy adversary. This is what I was made for, he thought. Not the raiding, not the killing, not the endless cycle of taking and losing. This, the impossible challenge, the thing that cannot be done. He would probably die trying to cross those mountains. The thought settled into him without resistance, without fear. Death was waiting, as it always waited, patient and certain. But death could not be experienced, only life. And life was what he was doing now, walking toward the impossible, embracing the unknown. The dream continued. On the 4th day, he found the river. It emerged from a crack in the earth, flowing cold and clear from some underground source. He drank deeply, refilled his water skin, washed the dust and sweat from his body. The water was sweet, impossibly so after days of rationing, and he allowed himself the luxury of simply sitting beside it for a while, watching the sunlight play across its surface. He thought about the survivors of Kull. By now, they would be close to the settlement they had been seeking, or they would have discovered that the settlement didn't exist, that the rumors had been wrong, that they were just as lost as everyone else in this brutal world. He hoped they made it, hoped the boy with a wooden horse grew up to be something other than what Conan had been at his age. But he could not save them, could not save anyone, really not even himself. All he could do was make choices, face consequences, walk forward into whatever waited. The river flowed north toward the mountains. He followed it. On the 7th day, he encountered the wolves. They emerged from the rocks as the sun was setting, a pack of 7 or 8, their eyes reflecting the dying light like coins of fire. They were thin, desperate, driven to hunt in the open by whatever pressures had depleted their usual prey. They circled him, testing, looking for weakness. He drew his sword and waited. Death by consumption, he thought, remembering the black glass plain, the endless tide of wolves, the experience of being eaten alive. He had died that way once. He could die that way again. But the wolves here were not endless. They were mortal, finite, capable of being fought. The alpha attacked first, going for his throat. Conan sidestepped, his blade opening the animal from chest to belly. The second wolf came from behind. He spun, kicked it in the head, heard the crack of its skull. The third and fourth came together. He killed one and drove the other back with a that took off half its face. The remaining wolves hesitated, reassessed. The man they had thought was prey was something else, something that killed without fear, without hesitation, without any of the tells that usually signaled an easy target. They retreated, disappeared back into the rocks, leaving their dead behind. Conan cleaned his blade on one of the corpses and kept walking. On the 10th day, he reached the foothills. The mountains rose above him now, close enough to touch if he reached high enough. Their slopes were covered with pine forest, dark and dense, hiding whatever dangers waited within. The air was cooler here, thinner, carrying the scent of snow from the peaks above. He made camp at the edge of the tree line, building a fire from fallen branches, cooking the meat he had preserved from the wolves. The night was quiet around him, the stars bright overhead, the northern star directly ahead now, no longer a guide, but a destination. He thought about what waited beyond the mountains. The land called death that Kull had spoken of, was it real? Did it exist as a physical place? Or was it something else, a metaphor for the endless journey that Conan had committed himself to? It did not matter. The walking was the point. The seeking was the purpose. Whether or not there was anything at the end of the path itself was what he had chosen. He slept beside the fire, and for the first time since the labyrinth, he dreamed. The dream was simple. He stood on a plain of black glass, beneath a sky the color of bruises, and Kull stood beside him. They did not speak. There was nothing left to say. They simply stood together, ancestor and descendant, looking toward a horizon that held something neither of them could see. After a long while, Kull nodded, just once, a simple acknowledgement, and then Conan woke to sunlight filtering through the pine branches, and the dream was gone, and the day was waiting to begin. He climbed for 3 more days. The forest gave way to bare rock, the bare rock to snow. The cold was vicious, cutting through his clothing, numbing his extremities, making every breath a battle. He should have died a dozen times from falls, from exposure, from the sheer inhospitable hostility of the mountain environment. But the dream continued. He found shelter in caves, warmth in exercise, food in the mountain goats that had adapted to this impossible terrain. He was not comfortable. He was never comfortable. But he was alive, and alive was all that mattered. On the 3rd day of climbing, he reached the pass. It was narrower than he had expected, a gap in the ridge barely wide enough for a man to squeeze through. The wind howled through it, carrying snow and ice, scouring the rocks with frozen fury. Beyond it, he could see nothing, just whiteness, blankness, the absence of anything recognizable. He did not hesitate. He stepped through the pass, into the unknown, into whatever waited on the other side. The land beyond was not what he expected. It was not a wasteland, not a frozen hellscape, not any of the deadly terrains he had imagined. Instead, it was a valley green and fertile, impossibly so at this altitude, its floor covered with grass and wild flowers, its air warm and sweet despite the snow-capped peaks that surrounded it. Conan stood at the edge of the valley, looking down at something that should not exist. A city. It rose from the center of the valley, its towers reaching toward the sky, its architecture unlike anything he had ever seen. Not Hyborian, not Atlantean, not any style that he could put a name to. The buildings seemed to grow from the earth itself, organic and ancient, as if they had been there since before the mountains themselves were formed. And it was empty. He could see that even from here the streets deserted, the windows dark, the whole vast structure silent and still. Whatever people had built this place, whatever civilization had called it home, they were long gone. Only the buildings remained, monuments to something that had passed beyond memory. A land that was already ancient before Atlantis was built. Kull had spoken of this place, had seen it perhaps in his own journey through the labyrinth. A land called death, not because death was what you found there, but because death was what you had to face to reach it. Conan had faced death many times in many forms, and now he stood on the threshold of a place that most men would never see, never even know existed. He started down the slope toward the city. The city was vast. He walked its streets for hours, exploring buildings that had stood empty for ages beyond counting. The architecture was strange but not hostile, the proportions wrong for human bodies. The doorways too tall, the windows too narrow, but everything still somehow functional, still somehow welcoming. He found no bodies, no bones, no evidence of what had happened to the people who had built this place. They had simply vanished, left their homes, their belongings, their entire civilization, and gone somewhere else. Or perhaps they had never existed at all. Perhaps the city had grown here on its own, a dream made solid, a possibility that had crystallized into reality without ever being inhabited. It did not matter. The city was here, and he was here, and that was enough. He found the chamber at the heart of the city. It was circular, its walls covered with inscriptions in a language he could not read. Its ceiling opened to the sky. In the center of the chamber was a pool, not of water, but of something else, something that reflected the stars above even though it was midday, something that seemed to contain depths beyond what the physical space could hold. He stood at the edge of the pool and looked into it. He saw himself, not his reflection himself, the Conan who stood in the labyrinth, the Conan who walked through death, the Conan who had learned the truths that most men would never touch. All of his versions, all of his possibilities, gathered in the depths of the pool like memories given form, and beyond them, behind them, beneath them, he saw something else. The witness, the core, the awareness that watched all the versions come and go, that persisted through every change, that could not be touched by birth or death or any of the transformations in between. It was not looking at him. It was not aware of being observed. It simply was existing, watching, being present to whatever appeared in the field of its attention. And Conan understood, in that moment, that he was looking at himself, not a version, not a possibility, but the truth of what he was beneath all the stories and histories and identities. Empty awareness, consciousness without content, the space in which everything happened. He had found the land called death, and death was not a place, it was a perspective, a way of seeing that dissolved all boundaries, all separations, all distinctions between self and other, between dreamer and dream. He stood there for a long time, looking into the pool, seeing himself, seeing himself, seeing himself. And then he laughed. The laugh echoed off the walls of the chamber, bounced between the inscriptions, rose toward the open sky. It was not a bitter laugh, not a desperate laugh. It was the laugh of someone who had finally understood a joke that had been playing on them their entire life. I came looking for death, and I found life. I came looking for an enemy, and I found myself. I came looking for an ending, and I found that there are no endings, only transformations, only changes, only the endless dance of awareness and appearance. He stepped back from the pool. The visions faded. The depths returned to their starlit stillness. He was Conan. He was also not Conan. He was also the witness who watched Conan, and the space in which the witness existed, and the mystery that underlay even that. All of it, all at once, all the time. And he was alive. That was the only thing that mattered, the only thing that had ever mattered. He turned and walked out of the chamber, out of the city, back toward the pass and the mountains and the world he had left behind. The journey back was easier than the journey there, not because the terrain had changed. The mountains were just as hostile, the passes just as treacherous, but something in Conan had shifted. Some resistance had dissolved, and he moved through the world now as if it were made of water rather than stone. He did not know what he would do next, did not know where he would go, what he would become, how the story of his life would unfold. But the not knowing no longer troubled him. It had become a kind of freedom, the understanding that anything was possible, that no path was fixed, that the future was written by choices made in the present moment. He crossed the mountains, descended into the foothills, found the river and followed it south, and as he walked, he thought about the survivors of Corval, and the boy in the grain pit, and the wooden horse that was still tucked into his belt. He thought about Kull, and the labyrinth, and the 7 deaths that had broken him and remade him into something new. He thought about the star that was still there, behind him now, still burning above the northern horizon. He had followed it to the land called death, had found what waited there, had seen the truth that underlay all other truths. And now he was walking south, toward the world of men, toward whatever adventures and challenges and opportunities waited in the lands he had left behind. But the star would always be there, waiting, patient, ready to guide him back whenever he was ready to return. Seek death at every moment, not because you want to die, because the seeking makes you alive. He smiled, not the cold smile of the raider he had been, not the fierce smile of the warrior. He was becoming something else, something that held within it the laughter of the chamber, the wisdom of the labyrinth, the peace that came from understanding that there was nothing to fear. He walked south toward the world, and the legend of Conan the Cimmerian began. Final passage. He did not fear death. He had learned in fire and drowning, in earth and madness, in the labyrinth, that the heart of all things that death could not be experienced, only in life, so he sought death. Every day, every moment, walked into battles that should have killed him, faced odds that should have destroyed him, challenged enemies that should have been beyond any mortal man. And always the dream continued. Always he woke up. Always there was another horizon, another adventure, another opportunity to test the limits of what was possible. Was he invincible? He never found out. No one ever gave him what he was seeking. But then again, maybe that was the point. Maybe the seeking was the thing itself, the life that could not be stopped, the dream that refused to end, the story that wrote itself and was written by itself and would go on writing until what? He didn't know. He didn't need to know. He only needed to walk, to fight, to live. The star burned above the northern horizon, steady and patient. He had followed it once to the land called death. He would follow it again some day, when the world had given him everything it had to give. Until then, there was the walking, the seeking, the endless, impossible, beautiful dream of being alive. Panamaka, la drama. We are of one blood, you and I, and the blood remembers. The end. Conan, The Shadow of Kull, a novel of Conan, the Sumerian, on the YouTube channel, Musings of a Cigarette-Smoking Man.
Goonie goo goo.
And a double goonie goo goo to you, my friend.
And a triple goonie goo.
Hey, cut that shit, don't you fucking idiots come around here speaking that goonie goo goo shit.